The moment Victoria Mercer stepped through the apartment door that rainy Friday night, exhausted CEO armor still perfectly in place, she locked eyes with the single father her brother had promised would barely notice her existence. What she didn't expect was the instant, dangerous recognition that passed between them. Two people who'd spent years drowning in loneliness, finally seeing their own reflection staring back. By Sunday morning, one kiss in a darkened kitchen would force both of them to choose between the safe lives they'd built alone and the terrifying possibility of being understood completely. If you're watching from your city tonight, drop a comment below and let me know where this story finds you. Hit that like button and stay with me until the end. Because what happened between Caleb and Victoria that weekend changed everything. Caleb Dawson stood in the kitchen doorway watching his daughter arrange her stuffed animals in a perfect semicircle on the living room carpet, her small voice narrating an elaborate storyline involving a bear, two rabbits, and some kind of interspecies peace treaty. Friday evening light filtered through the apartment windows, softer than usual because of the rain starting to gather in the clouds outside. "Dad, Mr. Buttons says he won't sign the treaty unless Princess Rabbit apologizes for stealing his honey. Sounds like Mr. Buttons has some legitimate grievances," Caleb said, leaning against the doorframe with his coffee mug. "Princess Rabbit should probably own that." Emma looked up at him with those serious brown eyes she'd inherited from her mother, the ones that still occasionally gutted him when they caught him off guard. But Princess Rabbit was hungry and missed her. "Buttons has so much honey. Isn't sharing important?" "Sharing's important," Caleb agreed, "but so is asking first." She considered this with the gravity of a federal judge, then returned her attention to the diplomatic crisis unfolding on the carpet. Caleb smiled despite the exhaustion sitting heavy in his chest, the kind that had nothing to do with lack of sleep and everything to do with the last 3 years of his life. The breakup 2 weeks ago hadn't been dramatic. Jessica had sat across from him at the coffee shop near her office, perfectly composed, and explained that she didn't see a future with someone who came as a package deal. She'd used that exact phrase, package deal, like Emma was some kind of inconvenient bonus feature instead of the entire point of his existence. He'd nodded, said he understood, and walked back to his car before the anger hit. Not at Jessica. She'd been honest, at least. The anger was older than that, deeper. Anger at himself for thinking someone might actually want the life he had to offer. Anger at the universe for making single fatherhood feel like a criminal record he had to disclose on the first date. His phone buzzed on the counter. Ryan's name lit up the screen. "Hey man, weird favor. Victoria's in town for the weekend handling some family stuff. Can she crash at your place? I know it's last minute. We'll explain later." Caleb stared at the message for a long moment. Victoria. Ryan's younger sister, the one Ryan talked about maybe twice a year in tones that mixed pride with something more complicated. The tech CEO, who'd built some kind of software empire before she turned 30, the one whose face occasionally appeared in business magazines Ryan left lying around. He typed back, "Sure. When?" "Tonight. Like an hour. I owe you huge." Caleb set the phone down and looked around the apartment. It wasn't a disaster exactly, but it wasn't ready for company either. Emma's art supplies covered half the dining table. His own work laptop and scattered papers claimed the other half, and he was pretty sure there were at least 3 coffee mugs hiding in various locations around the living room. We're going to have a visitor tonight," he said, already moving toward the table to start clearing space. "Uncle Ryan's sister is staying with us for the weekend." Emma's head popped up. "The fancy one?" "I don't think Uncle Ryan called her fancy. He said she runs a big company and wears suits and talks to important people." "That doesn't mean fancy," Caleb said, though he was pretty sure it did mean exactly that. "It means she's busy." "Is she nice?" "I don't know, sweetheart. I've never met her." "Then how do you know she won't be mean?" Caleb gathered Emma's markers into their container, considering the question. "Uncle Ryan wouldn't send someone mean to stay with us." Emma looked unconvinced but returned to her peace treaty negotiations. Caleb spent the next 45 minutes doing damage control on the apartment, shoving clutter into closets and wiping down surfaces with the frantic energy of someone who just remembered what adult company felt like. He put fresh sheets on the guest bed, cleared space in the bathroom cabinet, and made sure there were clean towels that didn't have cartoon characters on them. By the time the knock came, he'd worked himself into a low-grade anxiety about hosting a stranger. And not just any stranger, but someone who probably lived in a world of executive assistants and 5-star hotels and business class everything. He opened the door. The woman standing in the hallway looked like she'd stepped out of one of those magazines, all sharp lines and expensive fabric, dark hair pulled back in a way that probably had a technical name. Charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, black carry-on suitcase with wheels that didn't squeak. Professional armor, perfectly maintained. But it was her eyes that caught him. Tired, really tired. The kind of exhaustion that lived behind the bones and didn't show up in photographs. "Caleb?" she said. Her voice was lower than he'd expected, rougher around the edges. "Victoria, come in." He stepped aside, suddenly aware of how casual he looked in jeans and a faded Henley, barefoot in his own apartment like some kind of overgrown college student. She rolled the suitcase inside, taking in the space with a quick glance that felt more automatic than judgmental. "Ryan said you're doing him a favor. I appreciate it. I won't be in your way." "You're not in the way," Caleb said, closing the door. "It's just me and Emma, and she's pretty low maintenance." "Emma's your daughter?" "Yeah, she's 6. Currently negotiating a peace treaty between stuffed animals in the living room." Victoria's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been amusement or might have been surprise. Sounds intense. Geopolitics usually is. Emma appeared in the hallway then, still carrying Princess Rabbit, looking up at Victoria with open curiosity. "Are you the fancy one?" "Emma," Caleb said, his tone carrying a warning. But Victoria crouched down slightly, meeting Emma's eye level with unexpected ease. "I don't know if I'm fancy. Do I look fancy?" Emma studied her seriously. "You're wearing a suit," studied, "and your shoes are really shiny." "That's fair evidence," Victoria said. "But I also just spent 6 hours on a plane drinking bad coffee and reading contracts, which doesn't feel very fancy." What's a contract?" "Boring paperwork that adults have to sign when they make promises to each other." "Like a peace treaty?" Victoria smiled then, and it changed her whole face, cracked something open in the careful facade. "Exactly like a peace treaty." Emma seemed satisfied with this answer. "I'm Emma, that's my dad. This is Princess Rabbit." "Nice to meet all of you," Victoria said. She straightened up, and the professional armor slid back into place like a mask she'd momentarily forgotten to wear. "I should get out of your way. Ryan said the guest room is down the hall?" "Second door on the left," Caleb said. "Bathroom's next to it. Let me know if you need anything." She nodded and started toward the hallway, pulling her suitcase behind her with practiced efficiency. Caleb watched her go, trying to reconcile the exhausted woman who'd smiled at his daughter with the polished CEO exterior she wore like a uniform. Emma tugged on his hand. "She seems nice." "Yeah," Caleb said quietly. "Maybe she is." Victoria closed the guest room door and leaned against it for a moment, letting herself breathe. The room was simple. Double bed with a blue comforter, small dresser, window overlooking the street where rain was starting to fall in earnest. Nothing like the sterile hotel suites she'd been living in for the past 6 months, while the company went through its latest expansion nightmare. She set her suitcase on the bed and sat down beside it, suddenly aware of how much her body ached. 30 years old, and she felt like she'd aged a decade in the past year alone. Board meetings, investor calls, press interviews, product launches, crisis management, all of it blurring together into one endless marathon she couldn't stop running. Her phone buzzed. Ryan's name appeared with a message that made her stomach drop. Dad collapsed. "I'm at the hospital. They're running tests. Don't tell Mom yet. She's freaking out enough. Stay where you are. I'll call when I know more." Victoria read it 3 times, her chest tightening. Their father, the man who'd built his own business from nothing and never took a sick day in his life. The one who'd taught her that weakness was just another word for failure. She started to call Ryan, then stopped. He'd said he'd call when he knew more. Bothering him now wouldn't help anything. The rational part of her brain, the part that ran a billion-dollar company and handled crises before breakfast, kicked into gear. She couldn't do anything from Caleb's guest room. She couldn't fix this by working harder or strategizing better. She was stuck in a stranger's apartment while her father was in a hospital 300 miles away, and her brother was dealing with everything alone. The control she'd spent years maintaining started to crack at the edges. She stood up, needing to move, needing to do something. Unpacked her suitcase with mechanical precision, hanging the 2 extra suits in the small closet, arranging her toiletries in the bathroom with the same careful order she maintained in every hotel room, creating structure where she could, because structure was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. When she came back out to the living room 20 minutes later, wearing jeans and a sweater that felt strange after spending all day in business armor, she found Caleb in the kitchen cooking something that smelled significantly better than airline food. "You didn't have to change," he said without looking up from the pan he was stirring. "The suit was fine. I've been wearing it for 12 hours, Victoria said, needed to feel human again. "Fair enough." He glanced at her then, and something in his expression shifted, like he was seeing her differently now. "You hungry? I'm making pasta. Nothing fancy, but it's hot, and there's garlic bread." "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing. I'm already cooking. Adding more pasta takes about 30 seconds. Victoria hesitated, then moved into the kitchen. "Can I help? You know how to cook?" "I know how to follow instructions." He smiled slightly and nodded toward the salad ingredients on the counter. "Knock yourself out." They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the kind that didn't feel forced or awkward. Victoria chopped vegetables with the same precise efficiency she brought to everything, while Caleb moved around the small kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who'd learned to make meals work with whatever he had on hand. Emma wandered in, climbed onto one of the kitchen chairs, and announced that the peace treaty had been successfully negotiated and all parties were satisfied with the terms. "Diplomatic victory," Caleb said. "I'm proud of you." Princess Rabbit had to apologize, but Mr. Buttons agreed to share his honey on Tuesdays and Thursdays. "Compromise, Victoria said. "That's how the best treaties work." Emma beamed at her, then turned to Caleb. "Can I watch a show before dinner?" 20 minutes. Something age-appropriate. Emma scrambled down and disappeared into the living room. Caleb drained the pasta, his movements smooth and practiced. Someone who'd done this routine 1,000 times. "How long have you been doing this?" Victoria asked. "The single dad thing." 3 years. Her mom and I split when Emma was 3. "That must have been hard." "It was necessary." He didn't elaborate, and Victoria didn't push. She understood about things that were necessary but not good. "Ryan talks about you sometimes," she said. "Says you're the most reliable person he knows." Caleb laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "Reliability sounds boring when you say it out loud." "It sounds valuable to me." He looked at her then, really looked, and Victoria felt suddenly exposed in a way that had nothing to do with changing out of her suit. Like he could see past the CEO image, straight through to the exhausted woman underneath who hadn't had a genuine conversation in months. "Your brother said you're in town for family stuff," Caleb said carefully. "Everything okay?" Victoria's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, saw Ryan's name, and her heart rate spiked. "Excuse me." She stepped into the hallway and answered. "Ryan?" "Hey, Dad's stable, heart arrhythmia. They're keeping him overnight for observation. Mom's here. She's handling it better than I expected." "Do you need me to come?" "No, stay where you are. There's nothing you can do here, and Mom will just worry about you traveling in the rain." Ryan paused. "I'm going to stay at the hospital tonight. Can you handle being at Caleb's for the weekend? I know it's weird, crashing with someone you don't know." "It's fine," Victoria said, even though fine was a significant overstatement. "He seems nice. He's the best person I know. And Emma's great, you'll like her." Another pause. "Vic, I know you've got a lot going on with the company. Thanks for being flexible." "Family first," she said automatically, the phrase their father had drilled into them even while building a business that consumed every waking hour. "I'll call you tomorrow with updates. Get some sleep." He hung up before she could respond. Victoria stood in the hallway for a moment, phone in hand, trying to process the past hour of her life. Her father in the hospital, her brother dealing with crisis mode, herself stranded in a stranger's apartment wearing jeans and about to eat pasta like some kind of normal person. When she came back to the kitchen, Caleb had already plated the food. He took one look at her face and said, "Bad news? My dad's in the hospital, heart arrhythmia. Ryan's staying with him overnight." "I'm sorry. Is he going to be okay?" "They think so, but Ryan won't be back this weekend." "Which means I'm crashing your plans." Caleb shook his head. "My plans were watching Emma negotiate treaties and maybe doing some laundry. You're not crashing anything." He carried the plates to the small dining table. Come eat. Whatever's happening, you'll handle it better with food. Victoria wanted to argue that she wasn't hungry, that she should be working or calling the hospital or doing something productive. But the truth was she couldn't remember the last real meal she'd eaten, and the pasta smelled incredible, and Caleb was looking at her with an expression that wasn't pity or professional courtesy, but something closer to understanding. She sat down. Emma joined them a minute later, chattering about the show she'd been watching, something involving talking dogs and mysteries. Caleb listened with genuine attention, asking questions, making jokes that landed perfectly for a 6-year-old's sense of humor. Victoria watched him parent with the kind of easy competence that came from practice and genuine care, no performance involved. Victoria runs a big company, Emma announced suddenly, like she'd just remembered this crucial fact. I heard that, Caleb said. Pretty impressive. What kind of company? Emma asked. Victoria finished chewing before answering. We make software that helps other companies organize their information and communicate better. Emma looked confused. What software? Computer programs. Apps? Like the ones on your dad's phone. Oh, Emma considered this. Is it fun? The question caught Victoria off guard. Nobody had asked her if work was fun in years. They asked if it was successful, profitable, scalable, disruptive. Never fun. Sometimes, she said carefully, when we solve a hard problem or help someone do their job better. But mostly, it's a lot of meetings and emails. That sounds boring, Emma said with devastating honesty. Emma, Caleb said, his tone gentle but firm. It's okay, Victoria said. She's not wrong. A lot of it is boring. Then why do you do it? Emma asked. Victoria opened her mouth to give the standard answer about innovation and market opportunity and building something meaningful. But sitting at this small dining table with a 6-year-old who didn't care about corporate rhetoric, the real answer came out instead. I don't know anymore. Caleb's eyes met hers across the table, and something passed between them that felt dangerous and honest. Recognition, maybe, or just the acknowledgement that they were both carrying weight that didn't have easy answers. After dinner, Emma asked if Victoria wanted to see her room, and Victoria found herself following the little girl down the hallway, listening to explanations of various stuffed animals and drawings taped to the walls. The room was chaotic in the way kids' rooms are, full of color and creativity and the kind of mess that comes from actually living in a space instead of just occupying it. This is Princess Rabbit's castle, Emma said, pointing to an elaborate structure built from blocks and cardboard boxes. And this is Mr. Button's honey tree. Impressive architecture, Victoria said, meaning it. Dad helped with the hard parts, but I did the decorating. The decorating is the most important part. Emma smiled up at her, gap-toothed and genuine. Do you have kids? No. Do you want kids? Victoria hesitated. The honest answer was complicated, tangled up with years of putting career first and relationships second, and convincing herself that motherhood was something she'd get to eventually, someday, when the company stabilized and life calmed down. Except the company never stabilized and life never calmed down. And now she was 30 years old, looking at a future that felt increasingly empty despite being objectively successful. I think I might, she said quietly. Someday. You'd be a good mom, Emma said with the absolute certainty of someone who'd known her for exactly 90 minutes. You're nice and you listen when people talk. Something in Victoria's chest cracked open, unexpected and sharp. She crouched down to Emma's level. Thank you for saying that. It's true, Emma said simply. Then, can you read me a bedtime story? Dad usually does it, but he won't mind sharing tonight. Victoria glanced toward the living room where Caleb was cleaning up from dinner. I should ask your dad first. But when she found him in the kitchen loading the dishwasher, he just smiled and said, She already recruited you, didn't she? Is that okay? Are you kidding? Getting someone else to handle bedtime routine is like finding a unicorn. Enjoy it while it lasts. So Victoria found herself sitting on the edge of Emma's bed 20 minutes later, reading a story about a dragon who was afraid of flying while Emma listened with drowsy attention. Caleb appeared in his doorway halfway through, leaning against the frame and watching with an expression Victoria couldn't quite read. By the time the dragon learned to trust its wings, Emma was fighting to keep her eyes open. Victoria closed the book gently and stood up. Caleb moved into the room. kissing Emma's forehead and murmuring goodnight. Out in the hallway, with Emma's door closed softly behind them, Victoria said, "She's special." "Yeah," Caleb said. "She is. You're good with her, patient. I have a lot of practice screwing up." He said it like a joke, but Victoria heard the truth underneath. They walked back to the living room together, the apartment settling into the quiet rhythms of evening. Rain hammered against the windows now, steady and insistent. Caleb picked up 2 coffee mugs from earlier and carried them to the kitchen. "I should let you get back to your night," Victoria said. "I've imposed enough." "You haven't imposed at all." He rinsed the mugs, then turned to face her. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you actually want to be here? In the city, dealing with family stuff? Or did you get voluntold into this trip?" The question was too perceptive, too close to the nerve. The question was too... Victoria should have deflected with some polite corporate non-answer. Instead, she heard herself say, "I got on the plane because Ryan asked, but the second I landed, I realized I had no idea what I was doing here or why I keep saying yes to things that make me miserable." Caleb nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. "You want some tea? I'm making a cup anyway. I should probably work." "When's the last time you did something just because you wanted to, not because you should?" Victoria stared at him. "That's a dangerous question." "I know." He filled the kettle and set it on the stove. "But I'm asking anyway." She should have gone to the guest room, should have opened her laptop and answered the 47 emails waiting in her inbox and reviewed the quarterly projections and maintained the perfect professional distance that kept her life running smoothly. Instead, she sat down at the kitchen table and said, "Tea sounds good." They talked for 2 hours, about nothing important and everything important, about Emma's upcoming birthday and Victoria's nightmare board meeting last month, about Caleb's failed relationship with Jessica and Victoria's failed relationship with basically everyone she'd dated in the past 5 years, about the weird isolation of single parenthood and the weirder isolation of running a company everyone watched constantly. Somewhere around 11, Victoria admitted she couldn't remember the last time she'd had a conversation that didn't involve market projections or investor expectations. "That sounds lonely," Caleb said quietly. "It is." She stared into her empty mug. "I spent so many years building something I thought would matter, and now I'm standing in the middle of it wondering if I just locked myself in a very expensive prison. You could leave. And do what? Disappoint everyone who believed in me? Prove my father right that I wasn't tough enough for this? Or prove yourself right that you're allowed to want a different life?" Victoria looked up at him, this stranger who somehow saw straight through every defense she'd built. "You don't know me well enough to say that." "Maybe not," Caleb agreed. "But I know what it's like to keep running because stopping feels like giving up. And I know what happens when you finally hit the wall and realize you can't keep going the same direction. What happens? You get to choose something different if you're brave enough." The words hung in the air between them, challenging and gentle at the same time. Victoria wanted to argue that her situation was more complicated, that walking away from a billion-dollar company wasn't the same as leaving a bad relationship. But the truth was she'd spent 3 years watching Caleb rebuild a life after his marriage ended, and he seemed more genuinely content than she'd felt in a decade. "I should get some sleep," she said finally, standing up. "Thanks for the tea and the conversation." "Any time." Caleb stood too, gathering their mugs. "Victoria?" "Yeah, whatever's going on with your dad, whatever happens this weekend, you don't have to handle it alone. That's what Ryan sent you here for, so you'd have backup." Something in her chest twisted, unexpected and sharp. She'd spent so long being the person everyone else relied on that the idea of accepting help felt almost foreign. "Thank you," she managed. She escaped to the guest room before the emotion building in her throat could spill over. Closed the door, sat on the bed, and stared at her phone for a long moment before finally opening her email. 49 unread messages now. 3 from her assistant about scheduling conflicts. 2 from board members about the upcoming vote on international expansion. 1 from the PR team about a media interview she'd agreed to months ago and completely forgotten. She should answer them. Should maintain the perfect response time that made her seem superhuman and completely in control. Instead, she turned off her phone, changed into pajamas, and climbed into bed listening to rain drum against the window and Caleb moving quietly around the apartment, The stranger who'd somehow made her feel more understood in 3 hours than anyone had in years. Saturday morning arrived gray and wet, the kind of weather that made staying in bed feel less like laziness and more like common sense. Victoria woke to unfamiliar sounds, water running, quiet voices, the domestic soundtrack of a household that wasn't hers. She checked her phone. 2 messages from Ryan about their father's condition, stable, still under observation, 3 more emails from work, and a text from her assistant asking if she wanted to schedule a call with the Tokyo office before Monday. Victoria stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone face down on the nightstand without answering. When she emerged from the guest room 20 minutes later, showered and dressed in jeans and a soft sweater that felt almost rebellious after years of business casual, she found Caleb and Emma in the kitchen having what appeared to be a serious discussion about pancake toppings. "Chocolate chips are a dessert, not a breakfast food," Caleb was saying. "But pancakes are basically cake," Emma argued, "and cake has chocolate. That logic is dangerous. Dad, you're being unreasonable." Victoria cleared her throat. They both turned, and Caleb's expression shifted into something that looked like pleasant surprise. "Morning," he said. "Coffee?" "Please." He poured her a mug while Emma launched into an explanation of why chocolate chips were a perfectly reasonable breakfast choice, actually. Victoria found herself smiling despite everything, charmed by the kid's determination. "I think your dad might have a point about nutritional balance," she said carefully. Emma's face fell. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I'm on the side of compromise. What if we did chocolate chips in half the pancakes?" Emma considered this. "That's fair." Caleb shot Victoria a grateful look and started pulling out ingredients. "You want to help? I'm apparently negotiating breakfast terms now." They fell into an easy rhythm. Caleb mixing batter while Victoria set the table, and Emma provided running commentary on everything from the weather to the stuffed animal peace treaty's continued success. It felt weirdly normal, like they'd done this routine 100 times instead of just once. Halfway through breakfast, Victoria's phone rang. Her assistant's name flashed on the screen. "I should take this," she said apologetically. "Go ahead," Caleb said. "We'll save you some pancakes." Victoria stepped into the living room and answered. "Hey, Sarah." "Victoria, thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you all morning." Sarah's voice carried that particular tension that meant crisis mode was engaged. "The Tokyo office needs a decision on the server migration by Monday, and David's pushing to move the board vote up to next week instead of waiting until the end of the month." "Why is David pushing the vote?" "He says market conditions favor moving faster. But between you and me, I think he's worried about the quarterly numbers and wants to force a decision before people have time to see the full picture." Victoria pinched the bridge of her nose, feeling the familiar tension headache starting to build. "Tell him I'll review the data this weekend and make a call by Monday morning. He's going to want to talk to you directly. Then he can email me like everyone else. I'm dealing with a family emergency, Sarah. The company can survive 48 hours without me micromanaging every decision." Silence on the other end. Victoria realized she had never said anything like that before, never suggested that the company wasn't her first priority every second of every day. "Of course," Sarah said finally. "I'll handle David. Is everything okay? With your family?" "It will be. Thanks for managing things." Victoria hung up and stood for a moment in the quiet living room, listening to Emma's laughter floating from the kitchen. Through the doorway, she could see Caleb making funny faces while flipping pancakes, completely present in the moment instead of thinking about tomorrow's crisis or next week's deadline. "When's the last time you did something just because you wanted to, not because you should?" The question echoed in her head as she walked back to the kitchen and slid into her seat. Emma immediately started telling her about a dream involving dragons and chocolate rivers, and Caleb served the pancakes with the half-chocolate chip compromise they'd negotiated. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly while Emma was distracted by syrup distribution. "Work stuff. Nothing that can't wait." "You sure?" Victoria met his eyes and found genuine concern there, not the polite interest most people offered before moving on to their own problems. "Yeah," she said, "I'm sure." They spent the morning doing absolutely nothing productive, which felt revolutionary. Emma insisted on showing Victoria her art supplies, and somehow Victoria found herself sitting on the living room floor, painting watercolor pictures while rain continued its steady drum against the windows. Caleb worked on his laptop at the dining table, occasionally looking up to offer commentary on the artistic process, or warn Emma that using that much paint would definitely cause structural issues with the paper. Around noon, Emma announced she was bored and wanted to build a fort. Caleb looked at Victoria with an expression that said, "Help me," and Victoria surprised herself by saying, "I'm in." They spent the next hour constructing an elaborate blanket fort that spanned half the living room, using couch cushions, dining chairs, and every spare blanket in the apartment. Emma directed operations with the authority of a general, while Caleb and Victoria did most of the heavy lifting. At one point, reaching for a blanket at the same time, Victoria's hand brushed against Caleb's. The contact lasted maybe a second, but she felt it like an electric shock, sudden and unexpected. Their eyes met, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with fort construction. He pulled back first, clearing his throat and focusing on securing the blanket to the chair. Victoria told herself the moment didn't mean anything, just an accidental touch between two people who happened to be spending the weekend together. Nothing significant, but her hand still tingled where his had been. By early afternoon, Emma had claimed the fort as her kingdom and was busy establishing laws and taxes for any visitors. Caleb collapsed on the couch with the exhausted satisfaction of someone who'd completed a major construction project. "She's going to make us play castle for the next 3 hours," he said. "I've sat through longer meetings with less purpose," Victoria replied, settling onto the other end of the couch. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Emma rearrange her stuffed animals inside the fort. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm, the kind of weather that made the whole world feel smaller and quieter. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said. "Sure." "Do you ever feel like you're watching your own life from the outside? Like you're going through all the motions but not actually present for any of it?" Caleb turned to look at her fully. "Every day for about 2 years after the divorce, I was so focused on keeping Emma's life stable that I forgot to actually live mine. Just went through the routine on autopilot." "How did you stop?" One day Emma asked me why I never smiled anymore. Just said it out loud at breakfast, 6 years old and noticing that her dad was basically a robot. He ran a hand through his hair. That was my wake-up call, realizing I was teaching her that life was something you survived instead of enjoyed. Victoria absorbed that, feeling it hit somewhere deep. "What did you do?" "Started small. Took her to the park even when I was tired. Said yes to Ryan's dinner invitations instead of always canceling. Stopped treating every moment of happiness like it was somehow irresponsible." He paused. "And I let go of the idea that I had to have everything figured out before I was allowed to feel okay." "That sounds impossible." "It was terrifying," Caleb agreed, "but less terrifying than the alternative, which was disappearing into my own life and never coming back." Emma emerged from the fort demanding snacks and entertainment. Caleb got up to handle the snack situation, while Victoria stayed on the couch, turning his words over in her mind. When's the last time she'd said yes to something just because it sounded good? When's the last time she'd felt actually present instead of thinking 3 steps ahead to the next meeting, the next crisis, the next thing that needed fixing? Her phone buzzed. David from the board, sending a follow-up email about the vote timeline with thinly veiled pressure to respond immediately. Victoria stared at the email, then did something she'd never done before. She swiped it away without answering and turned off her notifications. The afternoon dissolved into the kind of unstructured time that only happened when weather trapped you inside with nowhere to go. They played board games Emma was definitely too young for but insisted on anyway. They made grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch. They watched a movie about talking cars that Caleb clearly had memorized from previous viewings. Somewhere in the middle of it all, Victoria realized she was having fun. Actually, genuinely having fun. The kind that didn't require strategy or image management or thinking about how it would look to anyone else. By evening, Emma was getting tired and cranky in the way kids do when they've had too much stimulation. Caleb suggested pizza for dinner, which Emma approved with enthusiasm. While he ordered, Victoria helped Emma clean up the art supplies scattered across the living room. "Do you like my dad?" Emma asked suddenly. Victoria fumbled the marker container. "What? Do you like him? Like, as a person?" Yes, he seems very nice." Emma studied her with those serious brown eyes. "He doesn't talk to people much. Just me and Uncle Ryan mostly. But he talked to you a lot last night. I heard you. We were just having tea and conversation. He smiled when he talked to you. The The real kind, not the polite kind. Victoria didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to explain that she'd noticed the same thing, that talking to Caleb felt different from talking to anyone else she'd met in years. Your dad's easy to talk to, she said finally. That's a nice quality. Emma seemed satisfied with this answer. I think you're easy to talk to, too, even though you're fancy. I'm not fancy, Victoria protested. You run a huge company and talk to important people. That's fancy. It's just a job, Emma. But do you like it? The question again, cutting straight to the truth. Victoria sat down on the floor next to Emma, surrounded by markers and half-finished paintings. Honestly, I'm not sure anymore. I used to love it. Used to wake up excited about solving problems and building something new. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about the work and started being about just surviving each day. That sounds sad, Emma said with devastating simplicity. Yeah, Victoria agreed quietly. It kind of is. Maybe you should do something else, something that makes you smile the real way. Before Victoria could figure out how to respond to that, Caleb returned to announce pizza would arrive in 30 minutes. Emma scrambled up to go wash her hands, leaving Victoria sitting on the floor thinking about 6-year-old wisdom and real smiles and what her life might look like if she actually had the courage to want something different. Dinner was chaotic in the best way. Emma talking with her mouth full, Caleb stealing pepperoni off her plate, Victoria laughing at their ongoing negotiation about vegetable consumption. It felt like family, and that thought both warmed and terrified her. After dinner, Emma's exhaustion caught up with her hard. She barely made it through half the bedtime story before falling asleep mid-sentence. Caleb carried her to bed while Victoria cleaned up the pizza boxes and paper plates, moving through his kitchen like she'd been doing it for years instead of a day and a half. When Caleb came back, he found her loading the dishwasher. You don't have to do that. I know. She closed the dishwasher and straightened up. But it feels good to do something normal, something that's not work. You want a drink? I have wine, beer, or some whiskey Ryan left here about 6 months ago. Whiskey sounds good. He poured 2 glasses and they migrated to the living room, settling onto opposite ends of the couch with the blanket fort still taking up half the space. Outside, the rain had picked up again, drumming harder against the windows. Emma asked me if I liked you, Victoria said before she could think better of it. Caleb nearly choked on his whiskey. What did you say? That you seem very nice. Ouch! Nice is code for boring. No, Victoria said quickly. Nice is code for, I don't know how to explain to a 6-year-old that I've talked to you more honestly in 2 days than I've talked to anyone in the past year. Caleb went very still. Victoria, I know this is weird. I know I'm your best friend's sister and we barely know each other and I'm leaving Sunday and this whole situation is temporary. The words came faster now, like a dam breaking. But I can't remember the last time someone asked me real questions and actually listened to the answers. I can't remember the last time I felt like a person instead of a job title. You feel it too, Caleb said quietly. I thought maybe I was imagining it. Feel what? This. Whatever this is. He set down his glass. I've spent 3 years convinced nobody would want the complicated reality of my life. Single dad, limited time, comes with a 6-year-old who asks stranger questions and demands emotional availability. I'm not sure I have any more. And then you walk in wearing a suit and looking exhausted, and I see someone who gets it, who understands what it's like to be drowning in the life you built. Victoria's heart was racing now. Caleb, I'm not asking for anything, he continued. I know you have a whole life 300 miles away. I know this weekend is just a weird pause in your real world. But I need you to know that talking to you has been the first time I've felt genuinely connected to another adult in longer than I want to admit. They stared at each other across the couch, both breathing too fast, the air between them charged with something dangerous and undeniable. I should go to bed, Victoria said, not moving. You should, Caleb agreed, also not moving. The moment stretched out, tension building with every second neither of them stood up. Victoria knew crossing this line would complicate everything. Knew getting involved with her brother's best friend while dealing with a family emergency and a company crisis was objectively insane. But she was so tired of being sensible, so tired of choosing the responsible option and ending up alone. Caleb, she said softly, I don't know how to do this. Do what? Want something just because I want it, not because it makes strategic sense or fits into a 5-year plan. He smiled then, sad and understanding. Yeah, that's the hardest part. Permission. They sat there on opposite ends of the couch, the space between them feeling both infinite and impossible to maintain, both wanting to close the distance and terrified of what would happen if they did. Finally, Victoria forced herself to stand up. Good night, Caleb. Good night, Victoria. She made it halfway to the guest room before she stopped, turned back, and found him still sitting on the couch, watching her with an expression that made her chest tight. For what it's worth, she said, this weekend has been the first time I've felt like myself in longer than I can remember. Worth a lot, Caleb said quietly. Victoria escaped to the guest room and closed the door, leaning against it with her heart pounding like she'd just run a marathon. Her phone sat on the nightstand, notifications still off, 47 new emails waiting. She ignored all of it, climbed into bed, and lay there listening to Caleb move around the apartment. This man who'd somehow cracked her open in less than 48 hours and made her want things she'd convinced herself didn't matter. Tomorrow was Sunday. Tomorrow she'd have to start thinking about going home, about facing the company and the board vote and the reality of her actual life. But tonight, lying in the darkness with rain falling outside and connection still humming in her chest, she let herself imagine what it might feel like to stay. Sunday morning broke gray and heavy, the kind of dawn that felt more like an extension of night than actual daylight. Victoria woke to the sound of muffled voices beyond her door and the disorienting realization that she'd slept better than she had in months, dreamless and deep in a stranger's guest room while her entire life waited 300 miles away. She checked her phone out of habit. 73 emails now, 6 texts from Sarah about the board situation, 2 missed calls from David, 1 message from Ryan saying their father was being released from the hospital later today and asking if she was doing okay. She typed back a quick response, confirming she was fine, then sat staring at the screen trying to remember what fine actually felt like when it wasn't just a default answer to deflect follow-up questions. The apartment was quiet when she finally emerged, showered and dressed in the same jeans from yesterday because she'd only packed business clothes and hadn't planned on spending the weekend playing house with a single father and his 6-year-old. Caleb sat at the dining table with his laptop open, Emma still asleep, judging by the silence coming from her room. He looked up when Victoria appeared, and the expression that crossed his face made her stomach flip. Recognition mixed with something more complicated, the emotional hangover from last night's conversation still hanging between them. "Morning," he said quietly. "Coffee's fresh." "Thanks." She poured herself a mug and hovered awkwardly between the kitchen and dining area, suddenly unsure how to exist in this space after admitting things she probably shouldn't have. "Emma still sleeping?" "Yeah, she was up late. Probably another hour before the kingdom demands breakfast." He closed his laptop. "Victoria, about last night. We don't have to talk about it." "I think we probably should." Victoria sat down across from him, cradling the coffee mug like a shield. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the world looking washed clean and strangely fragile in the weak morning light. "I don't usually do that," she said. "Say things out loud that I'm barely willing to admit to myself. I know that's what made it matter. Caleb, I leave today. I go back to my actual life, and you stay here with yours, and this whole weekend becomes this weird bubble that didn't really count. Is that what you want?" His voice was careful, neutral. "For it not to count?" The honest answer sat in her throat, dangerous and terrifying. No, she didn't want it to not count. She wanted it to mean exactly as much as it felt like it meant, which was significantly more than 2 days should allow. "What I want isn't really the issue," she said instead. "I'm Ryan's sister. You're his best friend. I live and work 300 miles away running a company that's currently imploding in 7 different directions. You have a daughter who needs stability, not her dad getting complicated with someone who's barely in town for 48 hours. Those are all very logical reasons why this doesn't make sense. They are. They're also all external. I'm asking what you want, Victoria, not what's sensible or strategic or least likely to cause problems." She met his eyes across the table. She met, and the intensity there nearly undid her. "That's not a fair question." "Why not?" "Because I've spent 10 years making every decision based on what makes sense instead of what I want. And the one time I try to do something different, it's with the one person who's completely off limits." "I'm off limits?" Aren't you? Caleb leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I spent 3 years convinced I was off limits. Too complicated, too much baggage, too damaged from the divorce to be anything other than Emma's dad. And then you showed up in a suit looking exhausted, and for the first time since my marriage ended, I felt like maybe I was allowed to be more than just functional. Caleb, I'm not asking you to blow up your life or make promises neither of us can keep, but I need you to know that this weekend mattered, that you matter, and pretending it didn't happen isn't going to make going back to normal any easier. Victoria's phone buzzed on the table. David's name flashed across the screen with another call she didn't want to answer. She declined it and looked back at Caleb. My normal is meetings and emails and board votes and pretending I have everything under control while slowly suffocating under the weight of expectations I created for myself, she said. Your normal is raising your daughter and being present and actually living instead of just surviving. Those aren't compatible no matter how much we might want them to be. Who says? Reality, geography, common sense. And if I said I don't care about any of that, Victoria's heart was hammering now, then I'd say you're not thinking clearly about what getting involved with me would actually mean. Media attention, schedule conflicts, the fact that my job requires me to be constantly available to people who don't care if I have a personal life. You and Emma deserve better than whatever scraps of time I might be able to carve out between crises. That's my decision to make, Caleb said quietly. Not yours. It's Emma's life, too. And Emma already likes you more than she's liked any woman I've introduced her to in 3 years, which isn't many because I gave up trying after the third person who looked at her like an inconvenience instead of a whole person. Victoria felt something crack in her chest. She's extraordinary. She is. And she sees things adults miss because we're too busy overthinking. Last night she told me you have sad eyes, but a real smile, and that meant you were someone worth knowing. 6-year-old wisdom. Usually the most accurate kind. They sat there in the quiet morning kitchen, the conversation circling around everything neither of them knew how to say directly. Victoria wanted to reach across the table and touch his hand, wanted to close the distance and stop thinking about consequences for 5 minutes. But the weight of reality pressed down hard, all the reasons this couldn't work stacking up like evidence in a case she was losing, despite being objectively right. Emma's door opened down the hall. Small footsteps padded toward the kitchen, and then she appeared in pajamas covered with planets and stars, hair sticking up in directions that defied physics. Is it breakfast time? She asked, rubbing her eyes. It can be, Caleb said, the shift in his tone immediate and complete. Dad mode engaged, the complicated conversation shelved. What sounds good? Waffles with strawberries and whipped cream. That's a lot of demands for someone who just woke up. You said Sunday breakfast could be special. I did say that. Caleb stood up, moving to the kitchen with practiced efficiency. Victoria, you hungry? I can help, she offered, grateful for the distraction. They fell into the routine they'd established yesterday, Caleb cooking while Victoria handled setup, and Emma provided running commentary on everything from the weather clearing up to the structural integrity of the blanket fort that had survived the night. It felt domestic and easy and absolutely terrifying in its simplicity. Halfway through breakfast, Emma looked at Victoria seriously and said, Are you leaving today? I have to get back to work tomorrow, Victoria said carefully. But you could stay today, right? It's still the weekend. Emma, Caleb warned gently, I'm just asking. We could do something fun. Go to the park if it's not raining, or the museum with the dinosaurs, or just watch movies and build more forts. Victoria felt her resolve wavering under the weight of Emma's hopeful expression. I have some work things I need to take care of. They can wait, Emma said with absolute confidence. Uncle Ryan says work always waits. People don't. Caleb nearly choked on his coffee. When did Ryan say that? Last month when you were sad about Jessica leaving. He told you that you should stop working so much and spend time with people who actually care about you. Thanks for that memory, Em. He was right, though, wasn't he? Caleb looked at Victoria with an expression that said, Help me. And Victoria found herself saying, The dinosaur museum sounds good, actually. Emma's face lit up like someone had just promised her the moon. Really? Really? But I need to make a couple phone calls first, okay? Okay. Emma scrambled down from her chair and disappeared into her room, presumably to start planning the day's activities with the kind of strategic intensity she brought to stuffed animal treaties. "You don't have to do that," Caleb said once they were alone. "I know you have work. Work will still be there in 3 hours," Victoria said, echoing Emma's wisdom even as her phone buzzed with another notification. "And honestly, I can't remember the last time I went to a museum just because it sounded fun. It'll be chaos. Emma has approximately zero chill in dinosaur museums." "Good. I could use some chaos that isn't corporate." She escaped to the guest room to return phone calls before she could change her mind. Sarah answered on the first ring, voice tight with stress. "Victoria, thank God. David's been calling every hour demanding to know your position on the vote timeline. Tell David I'll review his proposal tomorrow and make a decision by Tuesday. He's not going to like that. He doesn't have to like it. He has to wait." Victoria sat on the bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror above the dresser. She looked different somehow, less polished but more present. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Of course. When's the last time you took a weekend off?" "Actually off. No email, no calls, just disconnected?" Silence on the other end, then, "I honestly can't remember." "That's a problem. It's the job." "Is it though? Or is it just what we've convinced ourselves the job requires because we're too scared to set boundaries?" "Victoria, are you feeling okay? You sound different." "I'm fine. Just thinking about things differently." She took a breath. "Handle David however you need to. I trust your judgment. But I'm not cutting my weekend short for a vote that doesn't happen for another week." "Okay," Sarah said slowly. "I'll manage it." After she hung up, Victoria sat staring at her phone for a long moment. 79 emails now. Problems stacking up, decisions waiting, the entire machinery of her professional life grinding away, whether she was actively feeding it or not. She turned off the phone completely and left it on the dresser. The museum was exactly the chaos Caleb had promised. Emma dragged them from exhibit to exhibit with boundless enthusiasm, rattling off dinosaur facts with the confidence of someone who'd watched every documentary ever made. Caleb followed behind with the patient amusement of a parent who'd heard all these facts multiple times before, but still listened like they were new. Victoria found herself genuinely engaged in a way she hadn't been in years, asking questions and reading plaques and getting invested in the Cretaceous versus Jurassic debate. Emma kept trying to start. At one point, standing in front of a massive T-Rex skeleton, Emma grabbed both their hands and declared this was the best Sunday ever. "You haven't even seen the meteor exhibit yet," Caleb pointed out. "It's still the best. Because you're both here and nobody's checking their phone or being boring." Guilty heat crept up Victoria's neck. How many dinners had she sat through scrolling email while someone across the table tried to have a conversation? How many times had she chosen responsiveness over presence because it felt safer than actually connecting? "You're right," she said. "This is way better than phones." Emma beamed up at her, then sprinted toward the next exhibit with the kind of energy that made Victoria tired just watching. Caleb fell into step beside her as they followed at a more reasonable pace. "You're good with her," he said quietly. "She makes it easy." Not everyone thinks that. Most people see the constant questions and endless energy and decide it's too much work. Then most people are missing out. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment, weaving between other families and tour groups. Just two more people in the Sunday crowd, except they weren't really, because the tension between them hadn't dissolved despite Emma's presence. If anything, watching Caleb parent with such genuine patience and care made the attraction worse. Added layers to feelings Victoria was trying very hard not to examine too closely. At the meteor exhibit, Emma launched into a detailed explanation of extinction events, while Caleb and Victoria stood side by side, close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. Every accidental contact felt electric, charged with everything they weren't saying out loud. "When do you leave?" Caleb asked, voice low enough Emma wouldn't hear. "My flight's at 6. I should probably head to the airport around 3. So we have a few more hours." "Yeah. And then what?" Victoria watched Emma peer into a display case of meteorite fragments, her small face serious with concentration. "Then I go back to reality and try to remember how to be the person who runs a company instead of the one who builds blanket forts and goes to dinosaur museums. Those don't have to be different people. In my world, they do." "Your world sounds lonely." "It is," Victoria admitted. but it's the one I built, so I don't really have anyone to blame but myself. Zandrie inshakiyat. Caleb turned to look at her fully, and the intensity in his expression made her breath catch. You could build a different one, if you wanted. Could I? Or would I just be running away from responsibility because things got hard? There's a difference between running away and choosing something better. How do you know which is which? You don't, not for sure. But you can make a pretty good guess based on whether you're moving towards something that makes you feel alive or just away from something that makes you miserable. Emma returned then, full of questions about impact craters and dinosaur extinction, and the moment passed. But Victoria felt it settle in her chest, that distinction between running from and moving toward, the difference between fear and courage disguised as the same action. They had lunch at the museum cafe, Emma monopolizing the conversation with increasingly elaborate theories about what modern animals might survive an asteroid impact. Caleb engaged seriously with each hypothesis, while Victoria watched them both, memorizing details she knew she'd replay later when she was alone in her empty apartment, trying to remember what connection felt like. Bears would definitely survive, Emma declared. They're tough, and they hibernate, so they could just sleep through the worst part. Solid reasoning, Caleb said. What about birds? Some birds. Definitely not penguins, though. They need ice, and an asteroid would probably melt all the ice. You've really thought this through. I think about important things, Dad. You really do. Victoria's phone was still off, buried in her purse, and the absence of constant notification anxiety felt almost disorienting. She kept reaching for it out of habit, then remembering she had made a choice to be present instead of perpetually available. You okay? Caleb asked while Emma was distracted by a group of kids at the next table. Just not used to being disconnected, it feels weird. Good weird or bad weird? Honestly, both. Like I'm breaking some kind of fundamental rule by not being constantly on call. The rule's imaginary. That doesn't make it feel less real. After lunch, they walked back toward the apartment through streets still damp from yesterday's rain. Emma walking between them, holding both their hands and asking increasingly philosophical questions about time and space that neither adult was particularly equipped to answer. Dad, if you could go back in time, where would you go? Caleb considered this. Maybe to see the dinosaurs before the asteroid. That's boring. Everyone says dinosaurs. Okay, where would you go? I'd go to yesterday so I could have 2 days with Victoria instead of just 1.5. Victoria stumbled slightly, the casual statement hitting harder than it should. Emma didn't notice, already moving on to the next question. But Caleb's hand tightened around Emma's, and his eyes met Victoria's over his daughter's head with an expression that said, I told you so about Emma seeing things clearly. Back at the apartment, reality started pressing in around the edges. Victoria's flight was in 4 hours. She needed to pack, call a car, start transitioning back into CEO mode for the meetings waiting tomorrow. But Emma wanted to show her one more thing, just one more thing, and Victoria found herself sitting on the floor of Emma's room, looking at drawings and listening to stories about school and friends and the elaborate social dynamics of first grade. Caleb appeared in the doorway. Victoria needs to pack. She's got a flight to catch. But we didn't finish the fort, Emma protested. The fort will still be here next time. When's next time? The question hung in the air, unanswered because nobody knew the answer. Victoria felt her throat tighten. I'll come back and visit, she said, even though she had no idea if that was true or just something she desperately wanted to be true. Emma looked at her seriously. Promise? I promise I'll try. It wasn't the commitment Emma wanted, but it was the most honest thing Victoria could offer. Emma seemed to accept it, giving her a quick, fierce hug before running off to give them space. Victoria stood up slowly, aware of Caleb watching from the doorway. I should pack. Yeah. Neither of them moved. Caleb, this weekend was the best weekend I've had in 3 years, he finished. And I know that sounds like exaggeration or just emotion talking, but it's not. You made me remember what it feels like to be seen as a whole person instead of just a single dad who comes with complications. You did the same for me, made me feel like a person instead of just a job title. But Green? So what do we do with that? Victoria wanted to have an answer, Wanted to be the decisive CEO who could assess the situation and make the strategic call. But standing in the hallway of his apartment with the ghost of his daughter's hug still warming her chest, all her strategic thinking dissolved into pure want. I don't know, she admitted. I've never wanted something I couldn't logic my way into or out of. Is that what this is? Something you want? Yes. Which is terrifying because wanting things hasn't worked out well for me historically. Join the club. They stood there in the quiet hallway, close enough to touch but not touching, both trying to figure out how to navigate feelings that didn't fit into any framework they knew. Finally, Victoria said, I need to pack, and escaped to the guest room before she did something stupid like kiss him or ask him to give her a reason to stay. She packed mechanically, folding clothes and checking drawers, and trying very hard not to think about how much she didn't want to leave. Her phone sat on the dresser, still off, a small act of rebellion she'd pay for tomorrow when she turned it back on and faced the avalanche. A soft knock on the door. It's me, Caleb said. Come in. He entered carefully, staying near the door like he wasn't sure of his welcome. Emma wanted me to give you this. He held out a folded piece of paper. Victoria took it and opened it carefully. A drawing of 3 stick figures, one tall with dark hair labeled Dad, one smaller with a big smile labeled Me, and one medium-sized labeled Victoria with a crown drawn on her head. Above them in careful first-grade handwriting, Thank you for being our friend. Something in Victoria's chest cracked wide open. She made this? Just now, while you were packing. Caleb moved closer, looking at the drawing over her shoulder. The crown is because you're fancy, apparently. I'm not fancy. Try telling her that. Victoria stared at the drawing, this simple piece of paper that somehow meant more than any award or recognition her company had ever received. I don't want to go. The admission slipped out before she could stop it. Caleb went very still beside her. Then don't. I have a flight in 3 hours and a board meeting in the morning. I know, but you said you don't want to go, and I needed you to hear me say you don't have to. Victoria turned to face him, and the space between them felt impossibly small. If I stay, we'd have to figure it out. The distance, the schedules, what it means for Emma, how to tell Ryan. All of it would be complicated and messy and probably really hard. That's not a great sales pitch. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm just saying the option exists, that this doesn't have to end today just because the weekend's over. You barely know me. I know you built a company from nothing but sacrificed yourself to do it. I know you're exhausted, but keep going because stopping feels like failure. I know you're kind to 6-year-olds and honest about uncertainty and brave enough to admit when you're drowning. He paused. I know that talking to you feels like the first real conversation I've had in years. That enough to start with? Victoria's heart was hammering so hard she could hear it. What if this is just proximity? Forced together for a weekend and mistaking circumstance for connection? What if it's not? What if I can't be what you and Emma need? What if you're exactly what we need and you're just scared to find out? They were close enough now that she could feel the warmth coming off him, see the exact shade of uncertainty in his eyes that probably matched her own. Every logical reason to step back and maintain distance felt increasingly flimsy against the weight of what she felt standing this close to him. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. How to want something without a plan or guaranteed outcome. Nobody does. That's what makes it terrifying. I'm not good at terrifying. Could have fooled me. You run a billion-dollar company. That's different. That's calculated risk based on data and projections. This is just chaos. The best things usually are. Victoria looked up at him, this man who'd somehow become essential in less than 72 hours, who saw through every defense she'd built and liked what he found underneath anyway. The smart choice was to leave, go back to her controlled life, let this weekend become a nice memory instead of a complication. But she was so tired of making smart choices that left her alone. If I miss this flight, she said slowly, I'll have to deal with Sarah's panic and David's anger and rescheduling everything tomorrow. That's true. And it won't solve anything. I'll still have to leave eventually. Still have to go back to running the company. Also true. So staying doesn't actually change the fundamental problems. No, Caleb agreed. It just means we get a few more hours to figure out if this is worth fighting for. Worth fighting for. When was the last time Victoria had fought for something personal instead of professional? When was the last time she'd chosen connection over convenience? She pulled out her phone and turned it on. Notifications flooded the screen immediately. 87 emails, 12 missed calls, texts from Sarah reaching increasing levels of concern. She ignored all of it and called the airline. "I need to change my flight," she said when the agent answered. "Last flight out tonight instead of 6 o'clock. Caleb's expression shifted into something that looked like hope mixed with fear, and Victoria felt it echo in her own chest. After she hung up, they stood there in the guest room, surrounded by her packed suitcase and the weight of the decision she'd just made. "I bought us 4 more hours," she said. "That's not a solution. It's a start." "Caleb, I don't want to hurt Emma, or you, or Ryan when he finds out his sister and best friend have been—" She gestured vaguely between them. "Whatever this is. So we're careful. We take it slow. We figure it out as we go instead of having everything planned perfectly. I'm not good at slow or unplanned." "I know, but maybe that's exactly what you need." Emma's voice called from the living room, asking if Victoria was leaving yet, and the spell broke slightly. Caleb stepped back, giving her space, his expression careful. "You don't have to decide everything right now," he said quietly. "You just have to decide if you want to try." Victoria looked at the drawing still clutched in her hand, 3 stick figures under a carefully crayoned sun. "Yeah," she said, "I want to try." The smile that crossed Caleb's face made her decision feel worth every complication it would cause. They spent the next few hours doing nothing particularly special, playing cards with Emma, making dinner together, watching the sunset from the apartment windows as the sky cleared for the first time all weekend. But every moment felt significant, weighted with the knowledge that Victoria had chosen to stay instead of running back to safety. Around 8, after Emma had been coaxed into bed with promises that Victoria would really visit again soon, Caleb and Victoria ended up back on the couch, with the blanket fort still partially constructed around them. "I should probably ask," Victoria said, "what this actually is, what we're doing." "Honestly, I have no idea." "That's not reassuring. Would you prefer I pretend to have it all figured out?" "No," Victoria admitted. "I've dated enough men who had everything figured out and turned out to be completely wrong." "Barry, what's your track record with men who admit they're making it up as they go?" "Non-existent. You'd be the first." "I'm honored," Caleb said dryly. "Look, I don't know what the smart play is here. I don't know how we make distance work, or when I'd even have time to visit you, or how to explain to Emma that I'm seeing someone who lives 300 miles away. I just know that I haven't felt this connected to anyone since before my marriage fell apart, and the idea of letting you walk away without trying feels like giving up on something before it even starts." Di popotitam. Victoria turned to face him fully on the couch. "I'm going to be terrible at this. I'm going to get buried in work and forget to call and cancel plans because some crisis comes up. I'm going to prioritize the company over personal time because that's what I've trained myself to do for a decade." "Okay, that doesn't bother you?" "Of course it bothers me. But I'd rather deal with occasional cancellations and missed calls with someone I actually care about than have perfect availability with someone I'm just going through motions with." "You say that now." "I mean it now. Ask me again in 3 months and we'll see if I still do. But right now, I'm willing to try messy and complicated if it means not being alone anymore." Victoria felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "I don't cry," she said. "I haven't cried in years." "You don't have to now." "No, I mean," she wiped at her eyes roughly. "I spent so long being tough and controlled that I forgot how to just feel things without analyzing them to death. And then you and Emma show up and crack me wide open in one weekend, and I don't know how to process that." Caleb reached over slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. "You don't have to process it. You just have to let it be real." They sat there holding hands on the couch like teenagers, neither quite brave enough to move closer, but neither willing to let go either. Outside, the city moved through its Sunday night rhythms, people returning to normal after weekend breaks, preparing for Monday's return to routine. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said, "and you're probably going to think it's crazy. Try me. I've been running this company for 8 years. Built it from an idea into something that matters, made my father proud, Prove to everyone who doubted me that I could do it. She paused. And sitting here with you right now feels more significant than any of that. More real than anything I've accomplished professionally. That's not crazy, isn't it? Throwing away years of work for feelings I've had for less than 3 days? Who said anything about throwing away? You can have both. Can I? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like I have to choose between the life I built and the one I might want instead. Caleb squeezed her hand gently. What if you're creating a false choice? What if you can keep the company but change how you relate to it? Work to live instead of living to work? You make it sound simple. It's not. It's probably the hardest thing you'll ever do, but simple and hard aren't the same thing. Victoria's phone buzzed on the coffee table, Sarah's name flashing across the screen with what was probably the 15th follow-up about tomorrow's schedule. She declined the call without looking at it. That's progress, Caleb said. Or denial. I'm going with progress. They talked until nearly 11, about everything and nothing, circling around the big questions neither quite knew how to answer. Finally, Caleb said, You should probably get some sleep. Your flight's early. I don't want to sleep. I want to stay awake and make these last few hours last longer. They'll still be here in the morning. Will they? Or will I wake up and realize this whole weekend was just exhaustion and proximity and temporary insanity? Caleb stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. Only one way to find out. They stood there in the dim living room, close enough that Victoria could count his heartbeat, both of them terrified and hopeful in equal measure. Caleb, she said softly. Yeah? Thank you. For seeing me. For making this weekend mean something. Thank you for staying. For giving this a chance. The space between them felt charged, electric with possibility and terror. Victoria knew if she closed the distance now, if she kissed him the way every part of her wanted to, it would change everything. Make this real in a way that couldn't be rationalized away or dismissed as just a nice weekend. She closed the distance. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them testing whether this feeling was real or just imagination. But the second their lips met, something clicked into place with terrifying clarity. This was real. The connection, the chemistry, the sense of finally being understood, all of it real and undeniable and absolutely worth every complication it would cause. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. Okay, he said. That was, yeah. We should probably stop before this goes somewhere we're not ready for. Exactly. Neither of them moved. I don't want to stop, Victoria admitted. I know, but Emma's down the hall and you're leaving in 8 hours, and we need to actually think about what we're doing before we make it impossible to pretend this is casual. Right. Victoria stepped back reluctantly, her whole body protesting the distance. You're right. We should be smart about this. I hate being smart. Join the club. They stood there in charged silence for another moment before Caleb said, I should let you sleep. And Victoria nodded, even though sleep was the last thing she wanted. At the guest room door, he stopped. Victoria? Yeah? This isn't temporary insanity, just so you know. How can you be sure? Because I've been looking for someone who understands what it's like to carry weight alone, and I found her. That's not confusion or proximity. That's just luck. Victoria didn't trust herself to respond without crying or kissing him again, so she just nodded and slipped into the guest room before her resolve cracked completely. She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how to fit this new reality into the life waiting for her back home. Her phone sat silent on the nightstand, notifications muted, the corporate crisis temporarily held at bay. Tomorrow she'd have to turn it back on, face the consequences of disconnecting, rebuild the walls that kept her professional life functioning. But tonight, lying in the darkness with the memory of Caleb's kiss still tingling on her lips, she let herself imagine what it might look like to choose differently, to build a life that included both professional success and personal connection, work that mattered, and people who made it worth doing. The answer didn't come, but for the first time in years, she felt brave enough to ask the question. Morning arrived too quickly, gray light filtering through the guest room curtains while Victoria's alarm buzzed with aggressive cheerfulness at 5:30. She silenced it and lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the person who'd kissed Caleb last night with the CEO, who had a board meeting in 6 hours. Her phone sat on the nightstand like an accusation. She'd have to turn it back on eventually, face the digital avalanche waiting. But for just a few more minutes, she let herself exist in the liminal space between the weekend and whatever came next. When she finally emerged from the guest room, showered and dressed in the charcoal suit she'd arrived in Friday night, she found Caleb already awake in the kitchen making coffee. He looked up when she entered, and something passed between them that made the air feel thick. "You're up early," she said. "Wanted to say goodbye properly, not just wave from the door while you rush to catch a car." He poured her a mug and slid it across the counter. "How'd you sleep?" "Barely. You?" "About the same." They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen counter, the physical distance feeling symbolic of everything they hadn't figured out yet. Victoria wrapped her hands around the warm mug, needing something to do with them besides reach for him. "I've been thinking," Caleb said carefully, "about what happens next. And I don't have answers, but I do have questions, if you're willing to hear them." Victoria nodded, her stomach knotting with anxiety. "What does trying actually look like for you?" he asked. "Because I need to know if we're talking about occasional phone calls when you have time, or something more than that." The question was fair and terrifying. Victoria set down her coffee mug. "Honestly, I don't know. I've never tried to maintain a relationship across 300 miles while running a company that requires constant attention. My track record with relationships when I lived in the same city as someone is already terrible. That's not exactly confidence-inspiring. I know, but I'm trying to be honest instead of making promises I can't keep." Caleb leaned against the counter, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Okay, so let's start smaller. Can you commit to actually answering when I call? Not 3 hours later between meetings, but actually picking up the phone?" "Most of the time, yes. But there will be days when I'm in board meetings or investor calls, or I'm not asking for perfection, Victoria. I'm asking for effort." The distinction landed hard. "Yes, I can commit to effort." "Can you commit to visiting? Even if it's just once a month, even if it's just for a day?" "I want to say yes. But I also thought I'd have time for a personal life when I started the company. And look how that turned out. My intentions are good. My follow-through is historically awful." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something that might sound harsh?" "Go ahead." "Do you actually want this to work, or are you just scared of being alone and I happen to be convenient timing?" Victoria felt like he'd punched her in the chest. "That's not fair." "Maybe not, but I need to know because Emma's going to get attached if you keep coming around." "Hell, I'm already attached. And if this is just you trying something different for a few weeks before you decide it's too complicated and bail, I need to know now." "I don't know how to prove to you that this is real for me. I'm not asking for proof. I'm asking for honesty about your capacity. Because I'd rather hear now that you can't do this than get invested and have it fall apart in 3 months because you never actually had the bandwidth for a relationship." Victoria wanted to argue, to defend herself, to point out that he was being unfair, expecting her to have all the answers when they'd known each other for 3 days. But he wasn't wrong. She had a pattern of choosing work over personal connection, and that pattern hadn't changed just because she'd had one good weekend. "I don't have capacity," she admitted quietly. "Not in the way you're asking. My life is scheduled in 15-minute increments, and I already fail at maintaining friendships with people I've known for years. Adding a relationship on top of that, especially long distance, feels like setting both of us up for disappointment." "Okay. Okay?" Caleb straightened up, and his expression shifted into something more guarded. "I appreciate the honesty. Better to know now than later." "Caleb, wait. What am I waiting for, Victoria? You just said you don't have capacity for this." "I said I don't have capacity in my current life structure. That doesn't mean I don't want to try to create capacity. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Work fewer hours? Delegate more?" "Those sound great in theory, but you've been running the company for 8 years. If you haven't figured out balance by now, what makes you think it's suddenly going to happen?" The question hit like a slap because it was exactly what she'd been asking herself since 5:30 this morning. "I don't know, But maybe wanting to change is the first step toward actually changing. Maybe, Caleb said, but he didn't sound convinced. Look, I'm not trying to be an asshole about this. I'm just trying to be realistic. Long distance is hard under the best circumstances. Long distance when one person is a workaholic CEO and the other is a single dad with limited flexibility? That's nearly impossible. So you're saying we shouldn't try. I'm saying I don't want to set Emma up to lose someone else. She's already been through her mom leaving, then watching me date people who couldn't handle the reality of my life. I can't put her through that again just because I'm lonely and you happen to pay attention to me for a weekend. Victoria felt tears threatening again, angry and frustrated and hurt all at once. That's not what this is, isn't it? Be honest. If you weren't exhausted and burned out and desperately lonely, would you even be considering this? Or would you have smiled politely, left Sunday afternoon, and never thought about me again? That's not fair. Maybe not, but it's the question I keep asking myself. They stood there in tense silence, the coffee growing cold between them, all the hope from last night curdling into something defensive and painful. I should go, Victoria said finally. My car's probably waiting. Victoria, no, you're right. We're trying to force something that doesn't fit into reality, and pretending it might work is just going to hurt everyone involved. She turned to leave, but Caleb caught her wrist gently. Wait, just wait. Victoria stopped but didn't turn around, didn't trust herself to look at him without completely falling apart. I don't want you to go like this, he said quietly. Not angry. I'm not angry. I'm just realistic, like you asked me to be. Bullshit. You're hurt and I'm hurt. And we're both scared, so we're lashing out instead of actually talking about what's happening here. Victoria turned slowly to face him. What is happening here, Caleb? Because from where I'm standing, you just spent 5 minutes explaining all the reasons this won't work. I spent 5 minutes asking if you're actually capable of making it work. There's a difference. And I told you I don't know, which apparently isn't good enough. It's not about good enough. Then what is it about? Because I'm trying to be honest about my limitations instead of making promises I might break, and you're treating that like I've already given up. Caleb ran his hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. I'm treating it like someone who's been disappointed before and doesn't want to go through it again. Well, join the club. You think you're the only one who's been hurt? I think you use work as armor, so you never have to risk being hurt in the first place. The accusation hung in the air between them, cutting and accurate and absolutely infuriating because he'd known her for 3 days and somehow saw straight through defenses it had taken her a decade to build. You don't know me well enough to say that, she said, voice tight. Don't I? You admitted yourself that you've been running so hard you forgot what you were running toward. That sounds like someone avoiding something, not just pursuing success. And you're so much better. Hiding behind single fatherhood like it's a noble excuse for never putting yourself out there? That's different, is it? Or are we both just scared and using our responsibilities as shields? The words landed hard. Caleb stepped back like she'd hit him, and Victoria immediately regretted saying it even though she'd meant every word. I'm sorry, she said. That was true, Caleb finished. Probably true. But at least I'm scared of something specific. You're scared of everything that isn't work. Her phone buzzed in her purse. Her phone, the car service notification cutting through the tension. I have to go. Victoria, can we just... I don't think there's anything else to say. You want guarantees I can't give, and I want understanding you're not willing to offer. This was a mistake. She grabbed her suitcase from the guest room, moving on autopilot, trying desperately not to cry until she was safely in the car. When she came back out, Caleb was standing in the living room looking like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Emma's door opened. She appeared in pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Victoria, are you leaving? Yes, sweetheart. I have to get back to work. But you said you'd visit again. Victoria crouched down to Emma's level, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack her face open. I'll try my best, okay? That's what adults say when they mean no. The observation was devastating in its accuracy. Victoria pulled Emma into a hug, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and hoping the kid couldn't feel her heart breaking. You're pretty smart for 6 years old, she managed. I know, Emma said matter-of-factly. Then quieter. I'm going to miss you. I'll miss you too. When Victoria stood up, Caleb was still watching from across the room. She wanted to say something, to fix the mess they'd made of the morning, but her throat felt too tight and her car was waiting, and staying longer would only make everything worse. Take care of yourself, she said, the words inadequate for everything she actually felt. You too. She left before either of them could say anything else that might make leaving impossible. The ride to the airport was a blur of city streets and mounting panic as she finally turned her phone back on and watched the notifications flood in. 112 emails, 23 missed calls, texts from Sarah escalating from concerned to frantic to professionally worried. She called Sarah first. Victoria, thank God. I was about to file a missing persons report. I'm fine. Just had my phone off for the weekend. What's the emergency? David moved the board vote to tomorrow instead of waiting until next week. He's claiming market timing requires immediate action, but everyone knows it's a power play. He wants to force a decision before you've had time to build opposition. Victoria closed her eyes, exhaustion and heartbreak giving way to the familiar rush of corporate battle mode. What's our position's strength? Shaky. 3 board members are firmly on your side, 3 are firmly with David, and 2 are still undecided. If you can get both undecideds, we maintain control. But if David gets even 1, he has the majority to push through his expansion timeline. Who are the undecideds? Margaret Chen and Robert Walsh. Margaret's concerned about sustainability. Robert's worried about overextension. Both valid concerns, honestly. Victoria's mind was already running scenarios, calculating approaches, shifting back into the strategic thinking that had defined her professional life for 8 years. The pain from the fight with Caleb got shoved into a mental box labeled deal with later, because this was what she did. This was who she was. Set up calls with both of them for this afternoon. I'll be back in the office by noon. Already done. Margaret at 2, Robert at 4. Victoria, are you sure you're okay? You sound different. I'm fine, just a long weekend. I'll see you in a few hours. She hung up and stared out the window, watching the city slide past, trying to remember why any of this mattered. The board vote, the expansion timeline, the endless jockeying for position and power. It had all seemed so important Friday morning when she'd boarded the plane. Now it just felt exhausting. Her phone rang. Ryan's name appeared on the screen. Hey, she answered. Hey yourself, how was the weekend? Caleb didn't drive you crazy, did he? Victoria's chest tightened. No, he was great. Really hospitable. Good. I felt bad sticking you there on such short notice, but I figured better his place than a hotel. Emma probably talked your ear off. She's wonderful. She is. Caleb's done an amazing job with her, especially considering he's doing it solo. Ryan paused. Dad's home, by the way. Cardiologist says it was just stress-induced arrhythmia, nothing structural. He needs to slow down, which he's already complaining about. That sounds like Dad. Yeah, Mom wants to do family dinner next weekend. You free? I'll check my schedule and let you know. Everything okay, Vic? You sound off. Just tired. Long weekend. Okay. Well, get some rest. And thanks again for being flexible about everything. After they hung up, Victoria sat with the phone in her hand, staring at Caleb's contact information. She should probably text him, apologize for how she'd left things, try to salvage something from the wreckage of their fight. But what would she even say? Sorry for being honest about my limitations? Sorry for calling you out on your fear? Sorry for thinking 3 days could change the fundamental structure of either of our lives? She put the phone away and focused on prepping for the board battle ahead. The office welcomed her back with its familiar rhythm of crisis and controlled chaos. Sarah had a stack of briefing documents waiting, the undecided board members scheduled for calls, a strategy session blocked for early tomorrow morning before the vote. Victoria slipped back into CEO mode, like putting on armor, familiar and protective and suffocating all at once. The call with Margaret Chen went better than expected. Victoria walked her through the sustainability concerns, showed her the updated projections incorporating environmental impact assessments, and by the end of the hour had secured a verbal commitment to vote against David's accelerated timeline. Robert Walsh was harder. He listened to her presentation about risk mitigation and controlled growth, but his questions kept circling back to leadership capacity and long-term vision. The thing is, Victoria, he said finally. You've built something remarkable here, but I'm concerned about burnout. Yours specifically. You can't run this company on willpower alone forever. I'm not burning out, she said automatically. Aren't you? When's the last time you took a real vacation? When's the last time you made a decision that wasn't about the company? This weekend, she wanted to say. This weekend I made decisions about what I wanted instead of what made strategic sense. And look how that turned out. My personal life doesn't affect my professional performance, she said instead. It does when there is no personal life. Look, I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm trying to be honest. If I vote to keep you in full operational control, I need to know you're capable of sustaining this pace. And from where I'm sitting, you look like someone running on fumes. After the call ended, Victoria sat at her desk, staring at the city through her office windows. Robert's words echoing in her head, mixing with Caleb's from this morning. Everyone could apparently see she was drowning except her. Sarah knocked on the door. How'd it go? Margaret's with us. Robert's still thinking. That's good news about Margaret. Yeah. Sarah hesitated in the doorway. Can I say something that might overstep professional boundaries? Since when has that stopped you? Fair point. Sarah came in and closed the door. You look miserable. More miserable than usual, which is saying something. What happened this weekend? Victoria wanted to deflect, to give the standard answer about family stress and work piling up. But she was so tired of performing, and Sarah had been with her since the beginning, had earned some honesty. I met someone, she said quietly. Someone who made me realize how empty my life has become outside of work. And this morning I ruined it by being exactly the person he accused me of being, someone who uses professional success as an excuse to avoid personal risk. Sarah sat down across from her. Caleb, how did you... Ryan mentioned once that his best friend was a single dad. You stayed at Caleb's apartment all weekend. Doesn't take a detective. It doesn't matter anyway. I live here, he lives there. I have no capacity for a relationship, and we both got scared and lashed out. End of story. Is it? It has to be. I have a company to run, and a board vote to win, and approximately 17 fires to put out before tomorrow morning. I don't have time for complicated feelings about someone I spent 3 days with. Victoria, Sarah said gently, I've worked for you for 6 years. I've seen you handle hostile takeover attempts and product failures and investor revolts without breaking a sweat. But I've never seen you look as lost as you do right now. I'm not lost. I'm just tired. You're heartbroken. There's a difference. The words cracked something open in Victoria's chest. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to hold back tears that were fighting to escape. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to be good at my job and good at relationships. Every time I've tried, I've failed at one or both, usually both. Maybe you've been trying to be good at the wrong things. What does that even mean? It means maybe success isn't about perfect performance in every area. Maybe it's about figuring out what actually matters and being willing to be mediocre at everything else. The company matters. Does it? Or does it just feel safe because you know how to win at business, but you're terrified of failing at personal connection? Victoria dropped her hands and looked at Sarah. When did you become a therapist? When I started watching my boss systematically destroy her own happiness in the name of quarterly earnings. Sarah stood up. Look, I'm not saying quit your job or blow up your life. I'm just saying maybe Robert has a point. Maybe running on fumes isn't sustainable, and maybe the person you met this weekend gave you a glimpse of what life could look like if you actually let yourself want something beyond the next board victory. After Sarah left, Victoria sat alone in her office watching the sun set over the city, thinking about Caleb and Emma and the weekend that felt simultaneously like a lifetime ago, and 5 minutes passed. Her phone sat on her desk, Caleb's contact information 1 tap away. She picked it up 3 times and put it down 3 times, unable to figure out what to say that wouldn't make everything worse. Finally, around 9 p.m., she gave up and went home to her empty apartment, unpacked her suitcase mechanically, hanging the suits back in the closet and throwing the jeans in the laundry. Emma's drawing was still folded in her jacket pocket. She pulled it out and stared at the 3 stick figures labeled Dad, Me, and Victoria with her crown. Thank you for being our friend. The misspelling made her chest ache. She stuck the drawing on her refrigerator with a magnet and stood there looking at it. This artifact from a life that wasn't hers, but could have been if she'd been braver. Her phone buzzed. A text from Caleb. I'm sorry about this morning. You deserve better than me projecting my fear onto you. Victoria stared at the message, reading it 3 times before her fingers found the keyboard. I'm sorry too, for leaving angry and not fighting harder to make you understand that this was real for me. The 3 dots appeared immediately, indicating he was typing. Was? Past tense? Is. Present tense. Still real? Still terrifying. Still have no idea how to make it work. Join the club. She smiled despite everything. How's Emma? She typed. Sad you left. Asked me 17 times when you're coming back. I didn't have a good answer. Tell her I miss her. And that I'm trying to figure out how to be better at showing up. You don't have to figure it out alone. That's kind of the point of relationships. Victoria sat down on her couch, phone in hand, feeling the first crack in the armor she'd been wearing all day. I'm not good at asking for help. I noticed. I'm not good at trusting people won't leave. Maybe we can be bad at things together. That's not a great relationship model. Better than being alone. She thought about that. About spending the rest of her life achieving professional milestones while her personal life remained an empty footnote. About dying successful and lonely, with nobody to care beyond the press release. I have a board vote tomorrow. David's trying to force through an expansion timeline I think is reckless, and everything depends on me convincing Robert Walsh that I'm not burning out. Are you burning out? Probably. Yeah, what happens if you lose the vote? I don't lose control of the company, but I lose the ability to set operational pace. David gets to push his agenda, and I become a figurehead instead of actual leadership. And if you win, I get to keep running at an unsustainable pace until something breaks. Probably me. Those both sound terrible. Welcome to my life. Caleb didn't respond for a few minutes. Then, can I call you? Victoria's heart rate spiked. Yes. Her phone rang 10 seconds later. She answered before she could overthink it. Hey, Caleb said, and the sound of his voice made her chest tight. Hey. I've been thinking about this morning, about what I said and what you said and how we both kind of spiraled into worst-case scenarios instead of actually trying to figure this out. Yeah, and I realized I was asking you to have all the answers when I don't have any either. That's not fair. You were being honest about uncertainty, and I was treating that like failure. Victoria felt tears threatening again. I was being defensive and pushing you away before you could reject me for not being enough. So we both kind of sucked at that conversation. Eat the tomatoes. Mont. We really did. Caleb, I don't know how to be different than I am. I've spent my entire adult life building this company and this reputation, and walking away from that feels impossible. But staying feels like slowly suffocating. Then maybe don't walk away. Maybe just take a step back. Delegate more. Work fewer hours. Create space for something besides constant crisis management. It's not that simple. Why not? Because the company is mine, my vision, my responsibility, my... She stopped, the word identity hanging unspoken. Your whole sense of self, Caleb finished quietly. I get it. After the divorce, being Emma's dad was the only part of my identity that felt stable. Everything else was just wreckage. So I threw myself into fatherhood and told myself that was enough. Was it? For a while. But eventually I realized I was using it as an excuse to never risk being hurt again. Being a good dad is important, but it's not the only thing I'm allowed to be. Victoria curled up on her couch, phone pressed to her ear, listening to him breathe 300 miles away. What are you allowed to be? She asked. I don't know yet. Still figuring it out, but maybe someone who takes risks on people who scare him. Someone who believes connection is worth the possibility of loss. That sounds exhausting. It really is, but less exhausting than being alone. They talked for another hour, not solving anything but at least not actively making it worse. By the time they hung up, Victoria felt marginally less like she was drowning, and marginally more like maybe there was a lifeline she could reach for if she was brave enough. The board meeting the next morning was every bit as brutal as she'd anticipated. David came prepared with data and projections and thinly veiled accusations about conservative leadership holding the company back. Victoria countered with risk assessments and sustainability concerns and pointed questions about whose interests were really being served by reckless expansion. Margaret voted with Victoria as promised. The 3 board members already aligned with David stayed loyal to him. Robert Walsh listened to both presentations with careful attention, asked clarifying questions, and requested a 15-minute recess to consider his position. During the break, Victoria stood at the conference room windows watching the city move through its Tuesday morning rhythms, trying to remember why winning this vote mattered beyond ego and control. Sarah appeared beside her. "You okay?" "Honestly, I don't know. If I win, I get to keep killing myself maintaining impossible standards. If I lose, someone else makes decisions about something I built from nothing. Both options kind of suck. What if there's a third option? What's that? Win the vote, then immediately announce you're restructuring your role. Hire a COO to handle day-to-day operations. Shift yourself into more strategic oversight. Create actual space in your life for something besides work." Victoria stared at her. That would be admitting I can't handle everything. Or it would be admitting you're human and that building a sustainable company requires sustainable leadership. Robert's worried about burnout. Show him you're already working on addressing it. The 15 minutes ended before Victoria could fully process the idea. Robert returned to the conference room, and everyone took their seats. "I've made my decision," Robert said. "But before I share it, I'd like to hear Victoria address something that concerns me beyond just this particular vote. What's your plan for long-term sustainability? Not the company's, yours." Every eye in the room turned to Victoria. David was smiling slightly, clearly thinking this question would expose weakness. Victoria took a breath and made a decision that terrified her more than any business risk she'd ever taken. "You're right to be concerned, but," she said. "I've been running this company at an unsustainable pace, and pretending I can maintain that indefinitely isn't strategy. It's denial. So, effective immediately, I'm announcing my intention to hire a chief operating officer to handle day-to-day operational decisions. I'll shift into a more strategic role focused on long-term vision and major initiatives, with clear delegation of routine management." David's smile vanished. Margaret looked intrigued. Robert leaned forward. "That's a significant change," Robert said. "What prompted it?" "Honestly, realizing that burning out and destroying the company through exhaustion serves nobody's interests. I built something valuable here, and protecting that value means being realistic about human limitations, mine included." The room was silent for a moment. Then Robert nodded slowly. "That's the kind of self-awareness I was hoping to see. My vote is with Victoria on opposing accelerated expansion. We need sustainable growth from sustainable leadership, not reckless timelines pushed by ego." Victoria felt something like relief mixed with terror wash over her. She'd won the vote. She'd also just committed to fundamentally restructuring her role in the company she'd built. After the meeting ended, Sarah cornered her in her office. "Did you actually mean that? Or was it just strategic?" "Both. Mostly strategic in the moment, but it's the right move either way." "Oh," Victoria sat down heavily in her desk chair. "I can't keep doing this. Robert's right, you're right, Caleb's right. Everyone can see I'm drowning except me." "So what now?" "Now I start the search for a COO I can actually trust. Then I figure out what my life looks like when work isn't consuming every waking hour." She paused. "And then maybe I see if someone 300 miles away is still willing to take a risk on me." "The single dad? His name is Caleb, and yeah." Sarah smiled. "Good. You deserve to be happy, Victoria. Even if it's messy and complicated and doesn't fit into a strategic plan." After Sarah left, Victoria sat alone in her office for a long time, staring at her phone. Then she pulled up Caleb's contact and typed out a message. "I won the board vote, and I also just committed to hiring a COO and restructuring my role to create actual work-life balance. So I'm either very brave or very stupid." His response came quickly. "Definitely brave. How does it feel?" "Terrifying. Like I just jumped off a cliff, and I'm not sure if I packed a parachute. Welcome to the club. I felt like that the entire time I was falling for you." Victoria's breath caught. "Falling? Past tense. I'm pretty sure I've already landed." "You?" She stared at the message, her heart racing, the weight of everything changing, pressing down while simultaneously lifting off. "Still falling," she typed, "but I think I'm okay with that. Good. Because I'm not going anywhere." The certainty in those words made her chest ache with something that felt dangerously close to hope. The weeks that followed the board meeting felt like trying to rebuild a plane mid-flight. Victoria interviewed 7 candidates for COO before finding someone she didn't immediately want to fire on principle, a former operations director named Marcus, who had the rare combination of competence and the ability to tell her no when she was being unreasonable. He started 2 weeks later, and the transition was about as smooth as Victoria had expected, which meant not smooth at all. "You're micromanaging," Marcus said one afternoon, standing in her office doorway with a stack of reports she'd requested at midnight the night before. "These are all decisions I'm fully capable of making without your approval." "I know, I'm working on it." "Work faster. You hired me to take things off your plate, but you keep grabbing them back." He wasn't wrong. Victoria had spent 8 years making every decision personally, and trusting someone else with operational control felt like handing over pieces of her identity to a stranger. But she was trying, which had to count for something. The trying extended beyond work. She'd managed to carve out actual weekends, started leaving the office before 9 most nights, and had even attended her father's family dinner without checking email under the table. Small victories that felt monumental given her track record. Through it all, she and Caleb talked almost every night. Sometimes for 5 minutes between Emma's bedtime and his own exhaustion, sometimes for hours after Victoria finally shut her laptop and let herself be a person instead of a position. They texted throughout the day, random observations, photos of Emma's latest art projects, complaints about work stress that felt easier to share with someone who understood carrying weight alone. But they hadn't seen each other in person since that Sunday morning she'd left angry and heartbroken. 6 weeks of phone calls and messages, and building something real without ever being in the same physical space. "You should visit," Caleb said one night in late October, his voice tired but warm through the phone. "I know, I'm trying to find a weekend that works." "Victoria, you're the CEO. You can make a weekend work. I have the investor presentation the first week of November, and then the product launch the week after that, and Marcus is still getting up to speed on, you're making excuses." The accusation stung because it was true. "Maybe I'm scared." "Of what?" "That we work better on the phone than in person. That the weekend we had was a fluke, and trying to recreate it will just prove we're incompatible in real life." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Or maybe you're scared it'll work and then you'll have to actually commit to making space for this instead of keeping it theoretical." But Victoria sat on her couch in her empty apartment, phone pressed to her ear, hating how well he read her. "When did you get so perceptive?" "I've had 6 weeks to study your avoidance patterns. You're not as mysterious as you think." "That's depressing. Come visit. This weekend. Don't overthink it. Don't schedule it to death. Just get on a plane Friday night and see what happens." "Emma has school on Monday. You have work. I have a COO who's perfectly capable of handling things for 48 hours. Come on, Victoria. Take your own advice about being brave." She wanted to argue, to list 17 reasons why this weekend was impossible. Instead, she heard herself say, "Okay." "Okay? Yeah, I'll book a flight." The silence on the other end felt weighted. Then Caleb said quietly, "I've missed you, like actually physically missed having you in the same room." "Me too," Victoria admitted. "More than I want to admit." "Then stop making it theoretical and get your ass on a plane." She booked the flight before she could change her mind, leaving Friday at 6 and returning Sunday evening. 48 hours. She could handle 48 hours. The week crawled by with agonizing slowness, every meeting and decision feeling like an obstacle between her and Friday night. Marcus noticed her distraction. "You're fidgeting," he said during their Thursday operational review. "You never fidget." "I'm fine." "You're leaving early tomorrow, aren't you?" "Actual early. Not your version of early, which means only working 10 hours instead of 14. "I have a flight at 6. "Where to?" Victoria hesitated. She'd been careful about keeping her personal life separate from work, hadn't told anyone at the company about Caleb beyond Sarah's knowing looks and pointed questions about why she'd suddenly started smiling at her phone. "Just visiting someone," she said finally. Marcus raised an eyebrow but didn't push. "Well, whoever it is must be important if you're actually leaving the office before dark." "They are," Victoria said, surprising herself with how easily the admission came. Friday afternoon felt endless. Victoria forced herself to focus on handoff items with Marcus, making sure he had everything he needed to handle the weekend without her. At 5:30, Sarah appeared in her doorway. "Your car's here. And before you even think about bringing your laptop, I'm confiscating it. I need to review the..." No, you need to go visit the single dad who makes you smile like an actual human being instead of a corporate robot. Marcus has everything covered. The company will survive without you for 2 days. Victoria looked at her laptop sitting on her desk, the stack of reports waiting for review, the dozen unread emails flagged as urgent. Then she looked at Sarah's determined expression and made a choice. Okay, you're right. I'm sorry, what? Can you repeat that? I want to record it for posterity. Don't push your luck. The flight felt longer than 3 hours. Nervous energy making Victoria unable to focus on work or reading or anything, besides the fact that in a few hours, she'd see Caleb again and find out whether the connection they'd built over phone calls could survive actual proximity. She'd changed clothes 3 times before leaving her apartment, finally settling on jeans and a sweater that felt casual without trying too hard, then second-guessing that choice the entire drive to the airport. When the plane finally landed, she turned on her phone to find a text from Caleb. Emma's with Ryan tonight. I figured we should probably talk without a 6-year-old providing commentary. Victoria's stomach flipped. Just the two of them. No buffer, no distractions. Exactly what she wanted and exactly what terrified her. Sounds good. Landing now. I'll be at arrivals. She grabbed her bag from the overhead compartment and joined the slow shuffle of passengers deplaning, her heart rate increasing with every step closer to actually seeing him. What if 6 weeks had changed things? What if the easy conversation they'd built over phone calls disappeared the moment they were face to face? But then she walked through the sliding doors into arrivals and saw Caleb standing near the back wall, hands in his pockets, looking nervous and hopeful and exactly like she remembered, and every doubt evaporated. Their eyes met across the crowd. He smiled, and she felt it in her chest. "Hi," he said when she reached him. "Hi." They stood there for a moment, awkward and uncertain, both clearly wanting to touch but not quite sure how after 6 weeks of distance. Finally, Caleb said, "Come here," and pulled her into a hug that felt like coming home. Victoria buried her face in his shoulder and breathed him in, solid and real, and present in a way phone calls couldn't capture. "I'm sorry it took me this long. You're here now. That's what matters." The drive back to his apartment was filled with the kind of comfortable conversation they'd perfected over phone calls, talking about Emma's latest school project and Marcus's learning curve and whether Victoria had eaten anything besides coffee and granola bars this week. Easy and familiar, the nervous energy gradually settling into something warmer. But when they walked into his apartment and the door closed behind them, the reality of being alone together hit like a physical force. No Emma to provide distraction, no work emergency to interrupt, just the two of them and 6 weeks of tension that phone calls had built but not released. "You want something to drink?" Caleb asked, moving toward the kitchen. "Sure. Whatever you have." He poured 2 glasses of wine, and they migrated to the couch, sitting at opposite ends like they had that first weekend. The blanket fort was long gone, but the memory of building it hung in the air between them. "This is weird, right?" Victoria said. "We talk every day, but being in the same room feels strange." "Little bit. Good strange or bad strange?" "Not sure yet." Caleb smiled slightly. "At least you're honest about it." They talked for a while, catching up on details phone calls had missed, the way Emma had reacted to her first loose tooth, the investor who'd tried to poach Victoria for his startup, the small victories and frustrations of daily life. But underneath the conversation ran a current of awareness, every glance and accidental touch charged with meaning. Finally, Caleb set down his wine glass and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "What are we doing here? Like, actually, are we dating? Trying to date? Just seeing what happens?" Victoria had been waiting for this question, dreading it and needing it in equal measure. "I don't know. What do you want us to be doing?" "I want to date you. Properly. Not just phone calls and theoretical future plans, but actual commitment to figuring this out together." He paused. "But I need to know if you want that too, or if you're still testing the waters to see if this is worth disrupting your life for." "That's not fair. Isn't it? You took 6 weeks to visit. You're still treating this like an experiment instead of something real." "Because it is an experiment," Victoria said, frustration bleeding into her voice. "We barely know each other, Caleb. We had one good weekend and some nice phone calls. That doesn't automatically mean we're compatible for an actual relationship." "So what would prove compatibility? 6 more months of phone calls? A year? At what point do you feel safe enough to actually commit?" "I'm here, aren't I? I got on a plane and carved out a weekend despite having 17 legitimate reasons not to. What more do you want? I want you to stop hedging. Stop treating this like a business decision. You can optimize and just admit that you're scared and doing it anyway. Victoria stood up, needing to move, needing space from the intensity of his gaze. Of course I'm scared. You're asking me to fundamentally reorganize my life for someone I've known for 6 weeks. That's insane. People do insane things for connection all the time. Not people like me. People like me make rational decisions based on data and evidence. And what does the data tell you? Caleb stood too, moving closer. That talking to me every night has become the best part of your day. That you smile more now than you did 6 weeks ago. That despite every logical reason this shouldn't work, you keep choosing to try anyway? The data tells me that long-distance relationships have a 70% failure rate, and relationships that start under unusual circumstances have even worse odds. You looked that up? Of course I looked it up. I research everything. Caleb laughed, but there was frustration in it. You can't approach this like a quarterly review, Victoria. Feelings don't run on spreadsheets. Then how am I supposed to approach it? Just leap blindly and hope it works out? Yes, that's literally what relationships are. They stood there in his living room, too close and too far apart simultaneously, both breathing hard from an argument that felt inevitable and necessary. I don't know how to do that, Victoria said quietly. Leap blindly. I've spent my entire adult life minimizing risk and maximizing control. Asking me to just trust the process goes against every instinct I have. I know, but at some point you have to decide if protecting yourself from potential pain is worth guaranteeing yourself actual loneliness. The words hit hard because they were exactly what she'd been avoiding thinking about for 6 weeks. She'd restructured her work life, carved out space for personal connection, started therapy at Sarah's insistence, all while maintaining careful distance from the one thing that actually scared her, letting Caleb and Emma become important enough to hurt her. What if I can't do it? She asked. What if I try and fail and end up hurting you and Emma because I'm fundamentally incapable of being the person you need? Caleb closed the distance between them, taking her hands gently. What if you try and succeed? What if you're more capable than you think and you're just terrified to find out? Victoria looked up at him, this man who saw through every defense and liked what he found anyway, who was asking her to be braver than she'd ever been about anything that mattered. I'm really bad at this, she said. At what? Vulnerability. Asking for what I want, believing I deserve good things. I've noticed. Lucky for you, I'm patient. Are you? Because you seemed pretty impatient about 30 seconds ago. I'm patient about the big picture. I'm frustrated with the self-sabotage. He squeezed her hands gently. Victoria, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to stop running long enough to see if this is worth fighting for. She thought about the past 6 weeks, the late-night phone calls that had become essential, the way Emma's drawings showed up regularly in her mail, the gradual softening of defenses she'd maintained for a decade. The way coming here tonight had felt less like obligation and more like coming home. It's worth fighting for, she said quietly. I'm just scared I don't know how to fight for personal things the way I fight for professional ones. Then learn. We'll figure it out together. He paused. But I need you to actually commit to trying. Not testing, not experimenting, actually trying. Victoria took a shaky breath. Okay, yeah, I'm in. Scared out of my mind, but I'm in. The smile that crossed Caleb's face made every moment of fear worth it. He pulled her closer, and this time when he kissed her, it felt different from that first night, less tentative, more certain, a promise instead of a question. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. So we're doing this? Actually dating. Apparently, against all statistical probability. I'm going to need you to stop citing statistics during romantic moments. No promises. It's kind of my thing. They spent the rest of the evening talking through logistics with the kind of practical detail that felt both unromantic and necessary. They agreed to visit each other twice a month when possible, Video calls with Emma once a week, and honest communication about schedule conflicts before they became resentments. It wasn't poetry, but it was real, and real felt more valuable than romantic fantasy. Around midnight, Caleb said, "You should probably sleep. You've had a long day." "I'm not tired." A lie. But Victoria wasn't ready for the evening to end. "Victoria, you've been yawning for the past 20 minutes. Have not. Have two, come on. I'll show you to the guest room." Something in her chest tightened at the distance implicit in separate rooms, but she followed him down the hallway to the same room she'd stayed in 6 weeks ago. It looked exactly the same. Blue comforter, small dresser, window overlooking the street. "I should," Caleb started. "Stay," Victoria said before she could overthink it. "Just for a while. I don't want to be alone yet." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. They lay down on top of the covers, fully clothed, close but not quite touching. The intimacy of it felt more significant than the kiss earlier, this quiet trust in just being together without expectation. "Tell me about Emma's week," Victoria said, needing to hear his voice. Caleb launched into a story about Emma's science project involving growing beans and her determination to name each plant individually despite having 17 of them. Victoria listened to his voice rumble beside her in the darkness, feeling the knot of anxiety in her chest slowly loosen. Somewhere in the middle of the story about a bean named Theodore who refused to sprout, she fell asleep. She woke to morning light and the disorienting realization that Caleb was still there, had stayed the entire night despite both of them being fully dressed on top of the covers. He was awake already, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Hi," she said, voice rough with sleep. "Hi. You snore a little, did you know that?" "I do not." "You absolutely do. It's kind of cute." Victoria buried her face in the pillow, embarrassed. "What time is it?" "Almost 8. I should go pick up Emma from Ryan's. Can I come?" Caleb looked surprised. "You want to?" "I've missed her. And I did promise to visit, even if it took me 6 weeks to follow through." They drove to Ryan's place together, and Victoria felt her anxiety spike as they pulled into the parking lot. She hadn't told Ryan about her and Caleb, hadn't figured out how to explain that she was dating his best friend without it sounding completely insane. "He's going to know something's different," Caleb said, reading her mind. "Ryan's not stupid. Maybe we don't mention it yet. Just let Emma and I visit, keep it casual." "Victoria, I know. I'm being a coward. But can we just have one weekend before we deal with family complications?" Caleb clearly wanted to argue but didn't. "One weekend. But then we tell him. I'm not hiding this from my best friend indefinitely. Ryan's apartment was chaos when they arrived. Emma and Ryan building something elaborate with blocks, while sports commentary played on the TV in the background. Emma looked up when they walked in and her face lit up with genuine joy. "Victoria, you came back!" But she launched herself at Victoria with the kind of full-body enthusiasm only 6-year-olds could manage. Victoria caught her, surprised by how much she'd missed this kid's unfiltered affection. "I promised, didn't I?" Victoria said. "You said you'd try. Adults usually mean no when they say try." "Well, this time I meant yes." Ryan stood up, looking between Victoria and Caleb with an expression that suggested he was connecting dots faster than either of them wanted. "Vic, good to see you. Didn't know you were coming to town." "A last-minute trip," Victoria said, probably too quickly. "Thought I'd visit." "And you're hanging out with Caleb because we're friends," Caleb said smoothly. "She stayed at my place 6 weeks ago. We stayed in touch. Not that complicated." Ryan's expression said he thought it was absolutely that complicated, but Emma was already dragging Victoria over to see the block structure and explaining its architectural significance. And the moment passed. They stayed for coffee and conversation, Emma monopolizing Victoria's attention with stories about school and friends and the ongoing drama of bean naming. Victoria found herself genuinely engaged, asking questions and laughing at Emma's observations about first-grade social dynamics, the corporate stress of the past week fading into background noise. Finally, Caleb said they should get going, and Emma insisted Victoria had to come back to their apartment to see her room's new organization system. Ryan walked them to the door. "Vic, can I talk to you for a second?" Ryan said. "Alone?" Victoria's stomach dropped, but she nodded. Caleb took Emma down to the car while Ryan closed the door and turned to face his sister. "So," Ryan said, Are you going to tell me what's actually going on, or do I have to guess? Nothing's going on. I'm just visiting. Please don't insult my intelligence. I've known Caleb for 15 years. I know what he looks like when he's into someone, and he's looking at you the way he used to look at his ex-wife before everything went to hell. Victoria felt heat creep up her neck. It's complicated. It always is. Are you dating? Well, we're trying to figure out what we are. For how long? Since the weekend Dad was in the hospital, we've been talking every day since I left. Ryan ran his hand through his hair, clearly processing. My best friend and my little sister. That's actually kind of perfect and also really weird. You're not angry? Why would I be angry? Caleb's the best guy I know, and you could use someone who actually gives a damn about you as a person instead of as a networking opportunity. He paused. Does he make you happy? He paused. Does he make... The question caught her off guard. Yeah, he does. Then I'm happy for you, both of you. Ryan pulled her into a hug. Just don't hurt him, okay? He's been through enough. I'm trying not to. Try harder. That kid downstairs is already attached to you, and if you break her heart, I'll have to kill you, sister or not. Victoria felt tears threatening. I'm terrified I'm going to screw this up. You probably will at some point. Everyone does. But Caleb's patient and Emma's resilient, and you're more capable than you think. Just show up and be honest, and you'll figure it out. When she got back to the car, Caleb looked at her questioningly. He knows, Victoria said. And he said if I hurt you or Emma, he'll kill me. Caleb smiled. That sounds like Ryan. The rest of the weekend was exactly what Victoria needed. Unstructured time with Caleb and Emma, playing games and cooking meals and existing without agenda. They took Emma to the park Saturday afternoon and watched her make friends with other kids within minutes. Her natural confidence, something Victoria both envied and admired. Saturday night, after Emma was asleep, Victoria and Caleb ended up on the couch again, this time without the careful distance. She leaned against him while they watched a movie neither paid much attention to, too focused on the simple pleasure of physical proximity. I have to leave tomorrow, Victoria said during the credits. I know. I don't want to. So stay. Call in sick Monday, extend your flight. I can't. I have the exec team meeting Monday morning, and Marcus still needs approval on the Q4 budget. And Victoria, Caleb shifted to look at her directly. At what point does the work become an excuse instead of an actual obligation? She wanted to argue, to defend the legitimacy of her schedule. But sitting in his living room 300 miles from her office, she had to admit he had a point. Soon, she said. I promise I'm working on it, but I need more time to delegate properly, to trust that things won't fall apart without me. How much more time? I don't know. A few months? Marcus is good, but he's still learning the culture, and the product launch is critical. And you're always going to find reasons why now isn't the right time. There's always going to be one more critical project or important deadline. He said it gently but firmly. At some point you have to decide that this matters enough to inconvenience your work instead of only ever inconveniencing your personal life. The truth of it sat heavy in her chest. You're right. I know you're right. It's hard. I know it's hard, but if we're actually doing this, I need to know you're willing to prioritize it sometimes. Not always. Not even most of the time. Just sometimes. Victoria thought about her calendar for the next month. Back-to-back meetings, the product launch, investor presentations, board updates. Every slot filled with professional obligations, personal life squeezed into the gaps between work. What if I came back in 2 weeks? She said, for a long weekend, Thursday through Monday. Can you actually do that without it being a disaster? Probably not, but maybe that's the point. Caleb kissed her forehead. 2 weeks. I'll hold you to it. Sunday morning was harder than Victoria expected. Emma cried when she found out Victoria was leaving, and Caleb had to promise multiple times that Victoria would really truly come back soon before Emma calmed down enough to say goodbye. At the airport, Caleb walked her as far as security would allow. Thank you for coming, he said, for actually showing up. Thank you for being patient with me while I figure out how to do this. We're figuring it out together. That's the deal. She kissed him goodbye, not caring who saw, and walk through security before she could change her mind about leaving. On the plane, she pulled out her phone and texted Sarah. "Block my calendar Thursday through Monday, 2 weeks from now. I don't care what has to be moved." Sarah's response was immediate. "Finally. Took you long enough?" Victoria smiled and settled in for the flight home, already counting down the days until she could come back. The 2 weeks crawled by with excruciating slowness, each day marked by phone calls with Caleb and Emma that made Victoria simultaneously happy and acutely aware of the miles between them. She threw herself into preparing Marcus for her absence, delegating with a level of detail that made him tell her point blank that she was being ridiculous. "I've run operations teams before," Marcus said during their third handoff meeting in as many days. "I promise the company won't implode if you take 4 days off." "I know. I'm just terrified of letting go. I've noticed." He closed his laptop with deliberate finality. "Victoria, you hired me specifically so you could have a life outside this office. But you're still acting like the building will catch fire the second you walk out the door. Old habits. Break them. That's literally why I'm here." She tried. She really did. But Wednesday night, packing for her Thursday morning flight, Victoria caught herself adding her laptop to the suitcase for the third time before Sarah physically removed it from her hands. "No," Sarah said firmly. "You're going to visit your boyfriend and his daughter. You're not bringing work. What if something urgent comes up? Then Marcus will handle it. That's what he's paid for. But, Victoria, I've worked for you for 6 years. I've watched you sacrifice every relationship, every friendship, every moment of joy on the altar of this company. And for what? So you can die alone in a corner office with a great quarterly report?" The words stung precisely because they were true. Victoria sat down heavily on her bed, surrounded by half-packed clothes and the persistent anxiety that taking 4 days off was somehow professional suicide. "I don't know how to just leave," she admitted. "How to trust that things will be okay without me. Because you've never tried. You've convinced yourself you're indispensable, but the truth is the company would survive without you. The question is whether you can survive without the company defining your entire existence." Victoria thought about that on the flight Thursday morning, staring out the window at clouds and sky, and trying to remember who she'd been before building an empire became her entire personality. That version of herself felt distant and foreign, a girl who'd wanted to change the world, but hadn't yet learned that changing the world often meant sacrificing yourself in the process. Her phone buzzed with the text from Caleb. "Landing soon? Another hour." "Emma excited?" "She's been packed since Tuesday. Apparently we're going to the Science Museum and the aquarium and possibly building a rocket ship. Your weekend is very scheduled." Victoria smiled despite her nerves. "Sounds perfect." When she finally walked out of Arrivals, Emma was there with Caleb, holding a hand-drawn sign that said, "Welcome, Victoria," with the E written backwards and a crown drawn in the corner. The sight of it made Victoria's throat tight. "You came!" Emma launched herself forward, and Victoria barely caught her in time. "I promised, didn't I?" "Yeah, but sometimes adults promise and then don't show up because work is more important." Victoria crouched down to Emma's level, looking her directly in the eye. "Work isn't more important than you. Not even close." Emma studied her seriously. "Iskets," Emma studied, then nodded like Victoria had passed some kind of test. "Okay, come on, we have so much stuff planned." The weekend unfolded with the kind of chaotic joy only a 6-year-old could orchestrate. The Science Museum was exactly as overwhelming as promised, Emma dragging them from exhibit to exhibit with boundless energy, while explaining things with the confidence of someone who'd watched every documentary ever made. The aquarium was quieter, Emma pressing her face against the glass to watch jellyfish pulse through darkened water, while Caleb and Victoria stood close enough that their shoulders touched. "She really missed you," Caleb said quietly. "I missed her too. Both of you." "Yeah?" "Yeah." That night, after Emma finally crashed from exhaustion, Victoria and Caleb sat on the couch with takeout containers and the comfortable silence of people who'd spent the day together and didn't need to fill every moment with words. "I've been thinking," Victoria said, picking at her noodles, "about what you said, about prioritizing this sometimes instead of always prioritizing work. And you're right, I've been treating my personal life like something I'll get to eventually, someday, when work calms down. Except work never calms down because I keep taking on more instead of creating boundaries." Caleb set down his food and turned to face her fully. What are you saying? I'm saying I want this to be real. Not just weekend visits and phone calls, but actual integration into each other's lives. Which means I need to make changes I've been avoiding. What kind of changes? Victoria took a breath, the decision she'd been circling for weeks finally crystallizing into something concrete. I'm going to step back from day-to-day operations completely. Make Marcus actual COO with full authority, shift myself into board chair focused on strategy and vision. It's what I should have done months ago. That's huge. Itchy. It's terrifying, but it's also necessary if I want to have a life that isn't just work. She paused. And I want a life with you and Emma in it, which means making space for that instead of just hoping space magically appears. Caleb kissed her then, soft and lingering, and when they pulled apart, his eyes were suspiciously bright. What? Victoria asked. Nothing, just proud of you. That's a hard decision to make. I haven't actually done it yet, just decided to do it. The deciding is the hardest part. They talked late into the night about logistics and fears and what this might actually look like in practice. Victoria admitted she was terrified of becoming irrelevant to the company she'd built, and Caleb admitted he was terrified of her resenting him if she regretted stepping back. They didn't solve everything, but they were honest about the complications, which felt like progress. Friday morning, Victoria woke to Emma bouncing on the bed announcing that today was aquarium day, and they couldn't be late because the penguins had a feeding schedule. Caleb appeared in the doorway with coffee, looking amused. She's been up since 6 planning the route. The penguins are very important, Dad, Emma said seriously. Clearly. Go get dressed while I make breakfast. Emma scrambled off toward her room, leaving Victoria and Caleb alone. He sat on the edge of the bed and handed her the coffee mug. Sleep okay? Better than I have in months. It was true. Something about being here, in this space, with these people, made the constant anxiety that usually kept her awake feel distant and manageable. Good. He hesitated, then said, I know we're taking things slow, but I need you to know something. What? I'm falling in love with you. Probably already have fallen. And I know it's fast and maybe too soon to say, but I'm tired of hiding how I feel to make things less scary. Victoria felt her heart hammering. Every instinct screamed to deflect, to make a joke, to protect herself from the vulnerability of admitting she felt the same. But she just committed to making space for this, to choosing connection over safety. I love you too, she said quietly. Which is terrifying because I've spent 10 years convinced I wasn't capable of loving anything more than professional success. And now? Now I'm realizing success doesn't mean anything if you're alone at the top. She reached for his hand. I don't want to be alone anymore. You're not. Not if you don't want to be. The aquarium was everything Emma had promised. Crowds of families, the dim blue light of massive tanks. Emma providing detailed commentary on every species while other parents smiled at her enthusiasm. Victoria found herself relaxed in a way she couldn't remember being in years, just present in the moment instead of thinking 3 steps ahead to the next obligation. At the penguin exhibit, Emma pressed against the glass, watching them swim with absolute focus. Caleb put his arm around Victoria's shoulders, and she leaned into him without thinking about who might see or what it meant. This feels right, she said. Yeah, it does. On the drive home, Emma fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the day's adventures. Caleb drove with one hand, the other resting on the console where Victoria could reach it. I've been thinking about something, Victoria said quietly, not wanting to wake Emma. What's that? What if I looked for an apartment here, not moving completely, at least not right away, but having a place that's mine so I'm not always crashing in your guest room when I visit? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. That's a big step. I know, but if we're actually doing this, I need to be more integrated into your life and Emma's, which means being here more than twice a month. What about your company? I'll figure it out. With Marcus running operations, I can work remotely more often. Come back for board meetings and major decisions, but do strategic planning from anywhere. She squeezed his hand. I'm not saying it'll be perfect or easy, but I'm saying I want to try. Emma would lose her mind if you lived here. Is that a yes? That's a let's talk about it more when you're not making major life decisions on 4 hours of sleep and aquarium endorphins. Victoria laughed, the sound surprising her. Fair enough. That night, after Emma was asleep and they were back on the couch, Caleb brought it up again. You were serious? About getting a place here. Yeah, I was. Victoria turned to face him. Look, I know it's fast. We've technically only been dating for a couple months, but I'm 30 years old, Caleb. I don't have time to waste on relationships that aren't going anywhere. And this, us, feels like somewhere worth going. What about your dad? Your brother? They're 300 miles the other direction. I'll visit them too. It's not like I'm disappearing off the planet. She paused. My dad's actually been weirdly supportive about me stepping back from the company. Said he's glad I'm finally learning the lesson it took him a heart scare to figure out, which is that you can build an empire but die alone in it if you're not careful. They sat with that truth for a moment, both knowing how close Victoria had come to exactly that fate. Okay, Caleb said finally. If you're serious about this, let's actually talk logistics. What kind of place are you looking for? How often would you be here versus there? What does Emma need to know versus what do we keep private until things are more settled? They spent the next 2 hours working through practical details, and somehow the concrete planning made it feel less like fantasy and more like something that could actually work. By the time Victoria left Sunday evening, they'd agreed she'd start looking at apartments the next time she visited, with a target of having a place by the start of the new year. The flight home felt different this time, less like leaving and more like strategic retreat before the next advance. Victoria pulled out her laptop despite Sarah's warning and drafted the email she'd been avoiding for weeks. Marcus, effective January 1st, I'm promoting you to COO with full operational authority. I'll transition to board chair focused on long-term strategy. We should meet this week to discuss transition timeline and your compensation adjustment. This is happening. Let's make it work. V. She sent it before she could second-guess herself, then immediately texted Sarah. Just sent Marcus the promotion email. No backing out now. Finally. I'm so proud of you I could cry. Please don't. One of us crying is enough. You're crying? Little bit. Turns out making healthy decisions is emotional. Back in her apartment that night, unpacking and already missing Caleb and Emma, Victoria's phone rang. Ryan's name flashed on the screen. Hey, she answered. So Caleb told me you're looking at apartments in the city. Word travels fast. It's a big deal, Vic. You're actually restructuring your life for someone. Is that so shocking? Honestly? Yeah. I've watched you choose work over everything for a decade. This is different. Victoria sat down on her couch, suddenly exhausted. I'm terrified I'm going to screw this up. That I'll get there and realize I don't actually know how to be a person outside of being a CEO. You know what I think? Ryan said. I think you've been a person the whole time, just buried under so many professional expectations, you forgot what that felt like. Caleb and Emma are just reminding you. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You've just been too busy to notice. He paused. But seriously, I'm happy for you, both of you. Caleb deserves someone who sees him as more than just a single dad, and you deserve someone who sees you as more than just a job title. After they hung up, Victoria sat in the quiet of her apartment thinking about identity and success, and the way she'd confused achievement with worth for so long, she'd almost lost the ability to separate them. Her phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. Emma wants to video call. Says she has important news about Theodore the bean plant. Victoria smiled and dialed, and Emma's face appeared on screen, gap-toothed and enthusiastic. Victoria, Theodore sprouted. After 3 weeks, he finally grew. That's amazing. What changed? I moved him to the sunny window and talked to him more. Dad says plants don't actually understand words, but I think Theodore needed encouragement. I think you might be right. They talked for 20 minutes about bean plants and science projects before Emma handed the phone to Caleb. Hey, he said, his face filling the screen. You make it home okay? Yeah, already missing you guys. Same. House feels empty without you here. I sent Marcus the promotion email. Caleb's expression shifted to something proud and tender. How does it feel? Like jumping off a cliff, but in a good way maybe. The best things usually feel like that. They talked until Victoria could barely keep her eyes open, the time difference, an exhausting weekend catching up with her. When they finally hung up, she sat holding her phone, staring at Emma's drawing still stuck to her refrigerator, and felt something she hadn't felt in years, Hope that her life might actually become something she wanted to live instead of just something she survived. The next few months were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Marcus took to his expanded role with the kind of competence that made Victoria realize she should have delegated years ago, while she slowly extricated herself from day-to-day operations and into strategic oversight. It wasn't smooth. She micromanaged for the first month until Marcus threatened to quit, then overcorrected and became too hands-off until the board asked if she was still engaged with the company. But gradually, she found a rhythm. 3 days a week in the office for strategic meetings and board oversight, 2 days working remotely, weekends blocked for personal time with actual consequences if she violated them. It felt strange at first, almost wrong, to have white space in her calendar that wasn't immediately filled with obligations. She found an apartment in November, a small 2-bedroom near Caleb's place that felt impossibly extravagant, given she'd be there maybe half the time. But signing the lease felt significant, a concrete commitment to building a life that included more than work. "It's really happening," she told Sarah over coffee the week before the move. "I'm actually doing this." "How does it feel?" "Terrifying. Like I'm betraying everything I built." "Wait. Or like you're finally building something that includes yourself." The distinction mattered. Victoria had spent so long sacrificing her own needs for the company's growth that the idea of prioritizing personal happiness felt almost selfish. But watching other people at the coffee shop, couples talking, parents with kids, friends laughing, she realized most people didn't consider having a life outside work to be selfish. Just normal. Maybe she could be normal. Or at least some version of it that included loving a single dad and his daughter who drew her pictures and asked when she was coming home. The official move happened the first weekend of December, Ryan and Caleb helping carry furniture, while Emma supervised and provided detailed instructions on where everything should go. Victoria had hired movers for the heavy stuff, but the personal items felt important to handle herself, making each box and decision feel intentional. "This is really nice," Ryan said, looking around the apartment once most things were unpacked. "You sure you want to split time between here and there instead of just picking one?" "For now. Eventually, maybe I'll sell my place and move here full-time, but that feels like too many changes at once." "Fair enough?" He paused. "Dad's asking when you're coming to family dinner again. He wants to hear about the boyfriend." Victoria groaned. "How much did you tell him?" "Just that you're seeing someone." He drew his own conclusions from there. "Which are?" "That you're either really happy or having a midlife crisis, possibly both." "Great. That'll be a fun conversation." But when she did finally make it to family dinner the following week, her father surprised her. Instead of the interrogation she'd expected, he just looked at her across the table and said, "You look different. Better." "Different how?" "Less like you're carrying the weight of the world. More like you remember there's more to life than just carrying weight." Coming from the man who'd built his own company through sheer stubborn determination and nearly died from the stress of it, the observation meant something. Victoria felt unexpected tears threatening. "I'm trying to do things differently than you did," she said quietly. "No offense." "None taken. I'm glad you're smarter than I was." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you, Victoria. Not for what you built. I've always been proud of that. But for being brave enough to admit when something isn't working and changing course." The conversation stayed with her on the drive back to Caleb's apartment that night. This permission from the person whose approval she'd been chasing her entire professional life to want something different. Christmas came with the kind of chaotic warmth Victoria had only seen in movies. Emma insisted on decorating cookies with precise detail. Caleb cooked dinner while arguing good-naturedly with Ryan about sports. And Victoria found herself laughing at inside jokes and feeling like part of something instead of just observing from the outside. Late Christmas night, after Emma had finally fallen asleep and Ryan had left, and the apartment was quiet except for blinking tree lights, Caleb pulled Victoria close on the couch. "This was a good day," he said. "Yeah, it really was. You happy?" Victoria thought about it honestly. "Getting there, happier than I've been in a long time. What would make you all the way happy?" She considered the question. 6 months ago, she would have said closing a major deal or hitting revenue targets. Now those achievements felt hollow compared to sitting on this couch with this man in an apartment that smelled like pine and cookies, belonging somewhere that wasn't a conference room. This, she said finally, this is pretty close to all the way happy. Just pretty close? I'm working on it. Old habits. Caleb kissed her forehead. Take your time. We've got plenty of it. New Year's Eve found them at Ryan's place for a party that was mostly his friends and a few of Caleb's co-workers who'd become friends over the years. Victoria felt out of place initially, the only CEO in a room full of teachers and engineers and people who clocked out at 5 and didn't think about work until Monday. But Emma appointed herself Victoria's personal guide, introducing her to everyone with the kind of pride that made Victoria's chest ache. This is Victoria, Emma announced to anyone who'd listen. She runs a huge company, but she's not boring about it. She likes dinosaurs and building forts, and she's my dad's girlfriend. The casual way Emma claimed her as part of their family made Victoria realize this was real in a way her brain was still catching up to. She wasn't just dating Caleb, she was integrating into his entire life, becoming someone Emma introduced to people, someone who belonged in this space. At midnight, when everyone counted down and cheered, Caleb kissed her in a room full of people who knew them both. And Victoria didn't feel self-conscious or worried about professional image, just happy. New year, new life, Caleb said against her lips. That's incredibly cheesy. I know, but true. Walking home later, Emma between them holding both their hands, Victoria thought about the past 6 months and everything that had changed. She'd restructured her entire professional identity, moved to a new city part-time, fallen in love with a man and his daughter who'd cracked her open and taught her that success without connection was just elaborate loneliness. It wasn't perfect. She still struggled with delegation, still occasionally chose work over personal plans and had to apologize and try harder next time. Caleb still struggled with trust, still sometimes waited for her to decide this was too hard and leave. Emma still asked pointed questions about when Victoria was coming back, whenever she had to travel for work. The abandonment fear from her mother leaving never fully disappearing. But they were trying. Actually trying, not just theoretically committed to someday trying when life calmed down. They had weekly video calls even when Victoria couldn't visit, date nights that were sacred unless actual emergencies occurred. Honest conversations about feelings instead of letting resentment build. In February, Marcus called her into the office for a meeting that made her nervous until she saw his expression. The board loves what we're doing, he said. Revenue's up, employee satisfaction scores are the highest they've been in years, and everyone's commenting on how much more sustainable the pace feels. That's good? It's more than good. It's proof that your model of stepping back actually works. You've created something that doesn't require you to sacrifice yourself to maintain it. Victoria absorbed that, feeling something like vindication mixed with grief for all the years she'd thought sacrifice was necessary. So what now? Now you keep doing what you're doing. Strategic oversight, big picture thinking, letting me handle execution. It's working, Victoria. You don't have to prove anything else. She left the meeting and called Caleb immediately. Hey, he answered. What's up? Marcus says the new structure is working, like actually working, not just barely surviving. That's amazing. How do you feel? Weird. Like I spent 10 years convinced the only way to succeed was to destroy myself in the process, and it turns out that was just a story I believed. Most of our limitations are just stories we believe, Caleb said gently. The hard part is recognizing them and choosing different ones. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just had to slow down enough to notice. That weekend, Emma had a school project about family, and she asked Victoria to help her put it together. What's the project about? Victoria asked, sitting on Emma's bedroom floor surrounded by construction paper and markers. We have to draw our family and write about what makes them special. Emma was already sketching with focused determination. Victoria watched her draw 3 figures, one tall, labeled Dad, one small, labeled Me, and one medium-sized she was carefully adding details to. Is that me? Victoria asked, seeing the crown being drawn above the 3rd figure's head. Yeah, you're part of our family now, right? The question was asked with Emma's typical directness, but Victoria heard the uncertainty underneath. This kid who'd already lost her mother needed reassurance that the adults in her life weren't going anywhere. Yeah, Victoria said, her voice rough. I'm part of your family. Good, because I already told my teacher about you, and if you left now, that would be embarrassing. Victoria laughed, despite the tears threatening. Can't have that. They worked on the project together, Emma narrating her family's special qualities while Victoria helped with spelling and provided moral support. When they finished, Emma held up the poster proudly. Dad is special because he makes good pancakes and listens when I have bad days. I'm special because I'm good at science and making friends. And Victoria is special because she came back even though she was scared. And that's what brave people do. Victoria stared at the words. This 6-year-old's wisdom cutting straight to the truth she'd been dancing around for months. She had been scared, was still scared, but she'd chosen to show up anyway, to build something real despite the risk. You're pretty smart for a first grader, she managed. I know, Emma said matter-of-factly. That's why I'm special. That night, after Emma was asleep, Victoria showed Caleb the poster. He studied it for a long moment, then pulled her into a hug that felt like coming home. She's right, you know, he said against her hair, about you being brave. I don't feel brave. I feel like I'm constantly on the verge of screwing everything up. That's what bravery is, being scared and doing it anyway. Spring arrived with the kind of gentle warmth that made Victoria understand why people wrote poems about renewal. She'd been splitting time between cities for 6 months now, and the rhythm that had felt impossible at first was starting to feel almost natural. 3 days in her old city for board meetings and strategic planning, 4 days here with Caleb and Emma, and the life she was actively building instead of just theoretically planning. On a Saturday in April, she and Caleb took Emma to the park, while Ryan met them there with the news that he'd started seeing someone seriously and wanted their opinion. Her name's Michelle, Ryan said, looking nervous in a way Victoria had never seen him. She's a teacher, she's patient with my weird hours, and she thinks Emma's hilarious. She sounds perfect, Victoria said. Yeah, she kind of is. Ryan paused. I wanted to tell you guys first because you're the closest thing I have to relationship role models. Victoria nearly choked on her coffee. Us? We're disasters. You're disasters who chose to be disasters together, Ryan corrected. That counts for something. Watching Ryan talk about Michelle with the same nervous hope she'd felt falling for Caleb, Victoria realized they'd somehow become the thing she'd never thought possible. A family that wasn't defined by blood, but by choice and commitment and showing up even when it was hard. In June, the company hit a major milestone. 10 years in business, revenue targets exceeded, employee retention at record highs. The board wanted to throw a celebration, and Victoria found herself actually looking forward to it instead of dreading the performative networking. You should bring Caleb and Emma, Sarah suggested during planning. Make it actually about your life instead of just your work. Emma's 7, she'll be bored out of her mind. So make part of it not boring. Have activities for kids, make it family-friendly, show everyone that successful people are allowed to have actual lives. Victoria pitched it to the board, expecting pushback. Instead, Margaret Chen said it was the best idea she'd heard in years. We spend so much time pretending we're machines instead of humans, Margaret said. Let's celebrate being human for once. The party ended up being exactly that. Professional enough to feel appropriate, personal enough to feel real. Caleb wore a suit that made Victoria forget how to think clearly. Emma wore a dress she had picked out herself and informed everyone about her science fair project. And Ryan brought Michelle, who charmed everyone within 5 minutes. Late in the evening, after Emma had fallen asleep on a couch, and most guests had filtered out, Victoria found herself standing with Caleb, looking out at the city lights. You did good, he said quietly. We did good. This whole thing, restructuring my life, making space for actually living, I couldn't have done that without you pushing me. I didn't push. I just refused to let you hide. Same thing. Caleb turned to face her fully, and something in his expression made Victoria's heart rate spike. I have something to ask you, he said. Okay. Emma and I talked about it, and we want to know if you'd consider moving here full-time. Not splitting time anymore, actually relocating. Making this your home instead of just the place you visit. Victoria felt her breath catch. That's a big ask. I know. And I know you've already given up a lot. Changed your entire life structure to make this work. But we want you here. Not just sometimes. All the time. What about my apartment in the other city? My life there? Sell it. Keep it as an occasional crash pad. Whatever makes sense. But we want you to actually live here, with us. Be part of our daily life instead of just visiting it. Victoria thought about her apartment 300 miles away, the one she'd lived in for 8 years and barely noticed because she was never there. Thought about the office where she'd spent countless hours building something impressive but hollow. Thought about the life she'd had versus the life she was building now. Yeah, she said. Okay, let's do it. Caleb's smile could have lit the entire city. He kissed her there on the balcony overlooking downtown, and Victoria felt something settle into place that she hadn't even realized was still unsettled. The actual move took 2 months to coordinate. She sold her old apartment, relocated her official residence, set up remote work protocols with Marcus that actually functioned. The board was supportive, relieved even, that she'd found a way to maintain strategic oversight while actually having a life. On moving day in August, Ryan and Caleb helped carry the last boxes into the apartment that was no longer temporary, but permanent. Emma had decorated Victoria's new bedroom with drawings and a sign that said, "Welcome Home," with the same backwards E that made Victoria's chest tight. "You're really staying?" Emma asked for approximately the 20th time. "I'm really staying. Forever?" "Let's start with a very long time and see how it goes." Emma seemed satisfied with that answer. She grabbed Victoria's hand and dragged her toward the living room to show her the exact spot where they should put the bookshelf. That night, after everything was mostly unpacked and Emma was asleep and Ryan had left, Victoria and Caleb sat on the couch in her new apartment surrounded by boxes and possibilities. "How does it feel?" Caleb asked. "Scary. Like I just made a decision I can't take back." "Do you want to take it back?" "No. But old habits die hard, and my habit is protecting myself from risk by maintaining escape routes. And now? Now I'm here. Fully. Actually here. No backup plan, no safety net. Just committed." Caleb pulled her close, and she let herself lean into him without reservation. "For what it's worth, I'm terrified too. Terrified you'll wake up one day and realize you gave up too much for this. Then I guess we're both terrified together. That's basically what relationships are. Sounds awful. Sounds worth it." They sat there in the quiet of her new apartment in the city that was now home, with the life they'd built through honesty and effort, and refusing to let fear win. It wasn't perfect. Victoria still struggled with work boundaries. Caleb still struggled with trust. Emma still asked hard questions about commitment and permanence that neither adult had perfect answers for. But they were trying. Showing up daily, choosing each other repeatedly, building something real instead of something easy. 6 months later, on a random Tuesday in February, Victoria came home from a board meeting to find Caleb cooking dinner while Emma did homework at the kitchen table. It was ordinary, mundane even, the kind of domestic scene she'd watched other people have while building empires alone. "How was your meeting?" Caleb asked, not looking up from the vegetables he was chopping. "Good." Margaret proposed expanding board terms. Everyone agreed. Pretty standard. "Dad, how do you spell responsibility?" Emma asked. "Sound it out first." Emma made a face, but bent back over her paper with determination. Victoria poured herself a glass of wine and sat down at the table, helping Emma with her spelling while Caleb finished dinner, and realized this was it. This ordinary Tuesday night was the happiness she'd spent a decade chasing through achievement and success. Not the big moments or grand gestures, but the daily choice to show up and be present and let herself be loved completely. "Victoria," Emma said, breaking into her thoughts. "Yeah? Are you happy here? With us?" The question was asked casually, but Victoria saw the real worry underneath. This kid who'd been abandoned once still needed reassurance that the adults in her life weren't going anywhere. "Yeah, sweetheart," Victoria said, meaning it completely. "I'm exactly where I want to be." Emma nodded seriously, then returned to her homework. Caleb caught Victoria's eye across the kitchen and she smiled back. The small moment of connection, meaning more than any professional achievement ever had. Later that night, lying in bed next to Caleb in the apartment that was now fully hers, Victoria thought about the journey that had brought her here. The rainy weekend that changed everything. The months of phone calls and difficult choices. The gradual restructuring of her entire identity, from someone who achieved to someone who actually lived. She'd learned that success without connection was just a different kind of failure. That building an empire meant nothing if you had nobody to share it with. That the bravest thing she'd ever done wasn't starting a company or winning board battles. It was admitting she was lonely and needed more than professional validation to feel whole. Caleb stirred beside her, reaching for her hand even in sleep. Victoria laced their fingers together and closed her eyes, grateful for the person who'd seen through her armor and refused to let her hide. Grateful for the 6-year-old who'd asked hard questions and accepted honest answers. Grateful for the family she'd found by being brave enough to want something different. The company she'd built would continue, probably outlast her, become part of whatever legacy she left behind. But this, the quiet apartment, the man beside her, the child sleeping down the hall. This was the legacy that actually mattered. The one built on showing up and being present and choosing love over fear every single day. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was real and chosen, and hers in a way professional success had never been. And for the first time in her adult life, that was enough.